Chapter 417. The immortal king disappeared just like that. Just like his strange appearance and disappearance. It was also so incomprehensible that no one could feel any trace of him. Among the existences who were present to watch this grand competition, there were also many above the god realm. Among them, there were even terrifying existences at the true god realm. However, such powerful existences were actually unable to sense any trace of the immortal king's departure. This made many existences feel even more amazed by the mystery of the immortal king. A bunch of idiots. Even we can't sense any trace of his departure. It's just a group of true gods and ordinary gods who want to sense it. This is simply a joke. When Wang Gui saw those disappointed expressions, he revealed a trace of ridicule. When the immortal king left, the 11 grandmasters also released their senses. Unfortunately, they also couldn't grasp the trace of the immortal king's departure. In their senses, the immortal king strangely disappeared in front of them. This was unimaginable to them. What a mysterious immortal king. But that's right. If he was too ordinary, how could he be worthy of the title of immortal king? In the eyes of many existences, the immortal king was even more domineering than Lu Feng's title of emperor. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on the only person. Everything he created could be called a miracle, unparalleled in the world. Although Lu Feng's aptitude as a martial Dao Psyche master was not comparable to the immortal king's, in the path of alchemy, he could completely defeat the immortal king. Being able to refine a 5th grade pill at the great Psyche master level, then who dares to say that Futu can't become a true alchemy master at the spiritual Psyche master level? Being able to refine a 5th grade pill was already enough to be called a quasi-alchemy master. Everyone understood that as long as Lu Feng could make a breakthrough in the Psyche master level and become a spiritual Psyche master, then he would definitely be an alchemy master. This was obviously countless times more dazzling than the immortal king, who had just become an alchemy master at the peak of the spiritual Psyche master level. The 11 alchemy masters walked to Lu Feng's side. Their expressions were complicated. Ordinary existences didn't know the significance of Lu Feng refining this pill. However, as the absolute existences of the current era's Tao of alchemy, they were completely clear about it and understood it thoroughly. This meant that it was extremely possible for Lu Feng to surpass a region sacred pill master. He had surpassed the strongest alchemy sacred master who was said to be the closest to the god of alchemy. The path of alchemy is a true god. This was the only thought in the minds of many. They seemed to be able to foresee Lu Feng's future, the scene of him breaking through to the eternal legendary realm after the primordial immortal devil era and the era of pills and artifacts. Futu, good job. One returned to Lu Feng's side. Looking at Lu Feng, who had returned to his original appearance, he reached out his hand and gently patted him. There was a proud look on his face. Wang Gui brought Lu Feng here in order to let the world know that their human race had never withered away in the slightest on the path of alchemy. Lu Feng had indeed done it. Furthermore, what he had done was so satisfying and touching. Lu Feng could clearly see the excitement in Wang Gui's eyes. Lu Feng was filled with respect from the bottom of his heart for this almighty who had dedicated everything to the human race and the Tao of alchemy. Therefore, when he heard Wang Gui say this, he didn't feel as confident as he had in the past. Lu Feng bowed slightly and saluted Wang Gui respectfully. President, the existence of you in the alchemy path of the human race is the most fortunate thing for the alchemy path of the human race. Wang Gui's face flushed red when he heard Lu Feng's words. He was a heavenly master, comparable to any monarch realm martialist. In the current era of the universe, he was considered an almighty. If he unleashed his full combat strength, he would be a terrifying powerhouse who could destroy a part of the galaxy. However, such a fearful almighty actually showed such excitement when he heard Lu Feng's words. This was enough to show how excited Wang Gui was at the moment. Wang Gui patted Lu Feng's shoulder once again, but didn't say anything. At this moment, he was incomparably excited. Being acknowledged by Lu Feng was better than being acknowledged by trillions of people. Futu, this time you are the final victor. It can be said that in this generation, among the younger generation of alchemists, you are already standing at the peak of the grand alchemy competition. You are the winner of this most glorious competition, the only winner. Congratulations. Taradas walked over and said with a smile. Upon hearing this, Lu Feng responded in the most polite way possible. Behind him, the other three alchemist grandmasters, Grandmaster Gugue and Grandmaster Huang Mu, also came over to congratulate him. Su Ling was already standing beside Lu Feng. He didn't need to be on the same level as these people. Among these grandmasters, he had the best relationship with Lu Feng. In the end, the three alchemist grandmasters hesitated for a moment before walking over to congratulate Lu Feng. Lu Feng was also a little surprised that the three of them had come over to congratulate him. In his opinion, the three alchemist grandmasters should have left immediately after he succeeded. However, they still came. This made Lu Feng view the three of them in a new light. Thank you, alchemist grandmasters. Although Lu Feng was surprised by the attitude of the three alchemist grandmasters, his actions and etiquette were the same as the previous alchemist grandmasters. After seeing Lu Feng's attitude, the three foreign races alchemy masters sighed softly. To be honest, they would rather see Lu Feng's arrogance and be treated rudely by Lu Feng. After all, if that happened, it would prove that Lu Feng's temperament really wasn't good enough. Even if such an existence had a terrifying aptitude, the end result would still be the same. However, this humble and courteous Lu Feng made them feel uncomfortable and even afraid. After all, they knew that Lu Feng was terrifying to be able to display such a temperament after such an intense conflict. Wei Wei opened her mouth to say something. However, when she saw Lu Feng's clear gaze, both Yuan Ling and Yu Huayan sighed slightly. In the end, they turned around and didn't want to stay there any longer. Looking at their departing figures, the remaining alchemy grandmasters all revealed cold smiles. Although they had the same goal in some aspects, there was still a conflict between them that was basically difficult to reconcile. After losing their common goal, these people once again returned to their previous state. All right, as this time's champion, Futu, you have a champion's reward. Hearing this, Lu Feng's eyes lit up slightly. The alchemy master competition that was held once every 100 years. Only the younger generation would be rewarded. After all, there was no need for any rewards in the pinnacle grand competition between alchemists. One had to know that they were all existences standing at the pinnacle. Whatever they wanted, it was basically within their reach. Therefore, the Alchemy Master Alliance's reward basically only appeared once every 100 years. Every time the Alchemy Master competition of the younger generation was held, almost all the alchemy geniuses in the universe would be gathered together. The reason for this wasn't just because of the title of the number one alchemist of the younger generation. After all, who would still remember this after a few hundred years? The biggest reason was the attractiveness of the Alchemy Master Guild's reward. It could be said that the reward for the champion of the younger generation was absolutely shocking. It would definitely make the gods go crazy, make the true gods excited, and make the sky gods look askance at it. And now, the reward was finally going to be Lu Feng's. The light in his eyes was unusually bright. Lu Feng had naturally heard about the reward for the Alchemy Master competition of the younger generation. At this moment, he was slightly silent, waiting for the reward to be distributed. Looking at Lu Feng's expression, Taradas smiled slightly and shook his head gently. Then he said slowly, "Futu, this time your magnificent feat has never been seen before. Furthermore, you have also done us a great favor." Hearing this, Lu Feng smiled slightly. He naturally knew what this so-called great favor was. Indeed, if he and the Immortal King hadn't appeared out of nowhere, then the Alchemy Master Alliance wouldn't have been a match for Yuan Ling's disciple at all. Although Lu Feng had come this far for himself and for the human race, it was an indisputable fact that he had unintentionally helped the Alchemy Master Alliance. Seeing Lu Feng smile, Taradas didn't hesitate and said directly, "Futu, in that case, you can name the reward this time." Lu Feng wasn't the only one who was stunned. Even Su Ling and Wang Gui were stunned when they heard Taradis' words. However, the three Grandmasters of the Alchemy Master Alliance were still the same as before. It seemed like they had already known about this decision beforehand. Lu Feng was a little confused. This reward wasn't too little. It was too big. As everyone knew, the Alchemy Master Alliance, which didn't have the burden of any race or power struggle, was known as the richest organization in the world. What Taradis meant was that Lu Feng could ask for anything. As long as he wanted it, it would be satisfied. This was simply shocking. Lu Feng was silent, and so were Su Ling and Wang Gui. They hadn't expected this to happen before. Undoubtedly, this was quite shocking. After a long time, Wang Gui seemed to think of something. A trace of hesitation appeared on his face, but in the end, he nodded firmly. When he saw the hesitant Lu Feng, Wang Gui walked over. Futu, come with me for a moment. Lu Feng was stunned when he heard this. However, he quickly realized something. Although Lu Feng didn't completely trust Wang Gui like he did his parents, he was still willing to listen to this elder of the human race. Lu Feng nodded gently and walked over to Wang Gui's side. At this time, before everyone's eyes, Wang Gui directly used his unparalleled power to open up a small space exclusive to him. Lu Feng knew that in this exclusive space, everything was independent. It was impossible for people from the outside world to hear what they were saying. Lu Feng already understood that what Wang Gui was about to say was confidential. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to make such a move in front of these alchemy grandmasters. Do you have any ideas, President? Without waiting for Wang Gui to speak, Lu Feng already asked first. Wang Gui nodded his head lightly. He hesitated for a bit before speaking. Lu Feng, you are the young master of the Lu family. As the current emperor, the Federation and the Lu family can give you whatever resources you want. Lu Feng nodded gently. He knew that, based on what he had shown so far, as long as it was useful to him, the Federation and the Lu family would give him whatever he wanted. Even if they didn't have it, the entire human race would think of ways to get it for him. Therefore, he didn't need to think of ways to obtain these divine objects and resources like ordinary people. Chapter 418. Then you don't lack any divine objects at all. Although the Alchemist Alliance is known as the richest organization in the world, I think it's still inferior to the human race and the Lu family. Therefore, it's best if you don't ask for any divine objects. Lu Feng nodded again. Indeed, he didn't intend to ask for any divine objects. After hesitating for a moment, Lu Feng said, Actually, President, I want to ask for the right to read the 3 Pill Sutras. Hearing Lu Feng's request, Wang Gui smiled and shook his head gently. Lu Feng, you can rest assured about this. It might be difficult for others to get the right to read the 3 Pill Sutras, but for you it's nothing. Not to mention the aptitude you have shown, just the Pill Sutra in your hands is enough for the Alchemist Alliance to agree. These people didn't notice the 2 Pill Sutras given to Lu Feng by the Immortal King before he left. Therefore, in Wang Gui's eyes, Lu Feng only had 1 Pill Sutras. If you use this as a condition, then you'll really suffer a big loss. Lu Feng smiled gently. He also understood this. However, as Wang Gui said, he had the entire human race as his backing. He didn't lack any resources or divine objects at all. Besides the Pill Sutras, Lu Feng really didn't have anything else to ask from the Alchemist Alliance. Lu Feng, what will happen after you get the right to read the 3 Pill Sutras? You have to know that even if you get the recognition of the Pill Sutras, you'll need a terrifying amount of time to completely comprehend the 3 Pill Sutras. Based on your aptitude, I'm afraid you won't be able to read them completely without 3 to 5 years. After all, if you want to comprehend the second one after comprehending the first one, the difficulty will increase a lot. Lu Feng nodded gently. There are some things that Wang Gui didn't know. If he could really obtain the recognition of the 3 Pill Sutra souls, then Lu Feng would be able to completely comprehend them in a very short period of time. After all, he had Shen Yuan's Sea of Consciousness. His comprehension speed there was several times faster than in the outside world. However, Lu Feng also knew that even with the help of the divine origin sea, he would still need at least a year to comprehend the 3 alchemy scriptures. Moreover, he had more than 1 alchemy scripture in his possession, in addition to the one given to him by the immortal king. Lu Feng had 5 copies of the Pill Sutra. According to Wang Gui, it would take Lu Feng at least 2 or more years to read and comprehend all 5 volumes of the Pill Sutra. Normally, this wouldn't be a big deal. However, this was not the case at this moment. Before the immortal king left, he had told Lu Feng that an invincible monster had awakened. He was slowly recovering and would descend in a few days. To be able to make the immortal king pay so much attention to him, he had to be an invincible monster. Lu Feng didn't have the confidence to confront him, so he needed more time to improve his cultivation. He couldn't afford to waste these 2 years. President, you should know that I really need time. Wang Gui nodded gently and said, Indeed, although I really want you to pour everything into the path of alchemy, I don't think so. However, I also understand that this is absolutely impossible. You are the legendary miracle of the alchemy world, Futu. However, you are also the Lu Feng of the human race, and Emperor Lu Feng. Although the human race needs alchemy masters, it needs an absolute combat power like you even more. Therefore, during this battle of the kings, what you should do the most is to make the best use of your time to improve your strength. Lu Feng nodded gently. Wang Gui had thought of even more things. After all, Wang Gui was speaking from the perspective of a human race. President, I plan to return to the Federation after obtaining the 3 copies of the alchemy scripture and enter the time realm to slowly cultivate. With the time realm, Lu Feng could save a lot of time. He was now at the level of a martialist, a peak evolution martialist. He still had 1 more chance to cultivate in the time realm, if he relied on the help of his teacher, Dao Songtian. In that case, Lu Feng still had 12 days, which meant that he had 1,200 days to comprehend it. In that case, it should be enough. However, when he heard this, Wang Gui smiled gently and shook his head slightly. This way of thinking is indeed the best. However, returning to the Federation to cultivate in the time realm is not so wise. Lu Feng was stunned but didn't say anything. He looked at Wang Gui quietly and waited for him to explain. Lu Feng, cultivating in the time realm also consumes one's lifespan. It is just a matter of time acceleration. The amount of lifespan consumed is exactly the same as the amount of time you spend cultivating. You should know this, right? Lu Feng nodded. In the time realm, one could indeed accelerate time. However, at the same time, one's lifespan would also be consumed. The lifespan of geniuses like you is extremely precious. Therefore, if you can try not to cultivate in the time realm. After all, it is a completely independent world there. You simply cannot sense the existence of any universe laws. Therefore, your cultivation speed is much slower than in the universe. Lu Feng knew all this. However, although the time realm had so many restrictions, its usefulness really couldn't be ignored. When he saw Lu Feng's expression, Wang Gui knew what Lu Feng was thinking. Suddenly, he laughed heartily. When he heard this laughter, Lu Feng had a puzzled look on his face. Wang Gui didn't tease Lu Feng anymore. Instead, he explained directly. Actually, there's another realm in the universe called the Time Realm. It is different from the Time Realm. Cultivating in the Time Realm will not waste one's lifespan at all. The Time Realm is a true acceleration of time. At this moment, Lu Feng had an astonished expression on his face. He knew that if there was such a place, Dao Songtian wouldn't have kept it from him. However, Dao Songtian hadn't mentioned it yet. He hadn't even explained it in the slightest. This was enough to show how strange the Time Realm was. The Time Realm is different from the Time Realm. Cultivating in it has no lifespan restrictions at all. Furthermore, when cultivating in the realm of time, one's cultivation speed would be much faster. The speed of cultivation in the Time Realm can be accelerated to 200 times. 200 times. What a terrifying number. One day was equivalent to 200 days. Furthermore, one's lifespan wouldn't be consumed. Such a thing couldn't be described as heaven-defying. Then, President, if there really is such a thing, wouldn't there be monsters everywhere in this universe? If that was the case, then cultivating in the time realm for 1 year was equivalent to 200 years in the outside world. In that case, wouldn't there be experts who became gods before the age of 20 everywhere in the universe? Wang Gui smiled slightly and shook his head gently. If that's the case, then it's good. The time realm is extremely rare. In the current universe, there are only 2 places. Moreover, the time realm is so heaven-defying. Naturally, it is restricted by the universe. In the time realm, no laws or powers are allowed to exist. Even if you take pills in there, it won't have the slightest effect. Hearing this, Lu Feng finally calmed down slightly. If there really wasn't any restriction, then the time realm was a bit too terrifying. Therefore, the time realm is completely used for comprehension. Moreover, the biggest reason why people don't pay much attention to it at this time is because the price to use it is too great. Sure enough, even if it was just those restrictions, the existence of the time realm was already unimaginably terrifying. It was definitely an existence like a supreme sacred ground. However, no one knew the real situation. Then, there could only be one reason. That was, the restrictions of the time realm were too great. Every time the time realm is used, at least 3 types of peak 8th grade divine objects are needed. Moreover, cultivating in the time realm for 1 day requires 1 type of peak 8th grade divine object. Lu Feng took a deep breath. What the time realm required was 8th grade divine objects, and even peak 8th grade divine objects. This was really too terrifying. One had to know that 8th grade divine objects were things used by almighty experts in the king realm. Divine objects of this level, even heavenly gods couldn't use them. Any 8th grade divine object was enough to move an almighty expert in the king realm. And a peak 8th grade divine object was definitely enough to make those experts in the virtual king realm above the 5th level fight for it. But now, in order to activate the time realm, 3 types of divine objects were needed. Moreover, every day, 1 type of peak 8th grade divine object was needed. This level of consumption was truly shocking to the point of being unimaginable. Lu Feng believed that even a peak Overlord race wouldn't be able to bear such a terrifying consumption. Soon, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of something. A trace of excitement appeared in his eyes. Lu Feng looked at Wang Gui, and Wang Gui nodded gently. In the current universe, there are only 2 time realms. One belongs to the first royal family of the Emperor race, Di Shi Tian's bloodline. The other place is in our Alchemist Alliance. I said that your condition is to enter the time realm to cultivate for a few days, so that you can try to comprehend the pill scripture. Lu Feng fell silent. After a long time, he looked at Wang Gui and asked, "Then, will the Alchemist Alliance agree?" A peak 8th grade divine object was definitely not something that an ordinary 8th grade divine object could compare to. This was something that even a 5th level virtual king realm expert would disregard his reputation to fight for. It could be said that this kind of item was absolutely precious in any race. If Lu Feng wanted to enter the time realm to cultivate, he would need to consume at least 4 peak 8th grade divine objects. This kind of price was really too terrifying. In Lu Feng's opinion, even the Alchemist Alliance wouldn't agree. After all, Lu Feng was only the champion of the younger generation's grand alchemy competition. Lu Feng, I know your concerns. In fact, I'm also worried that they won't agree. After all, you have a race, and anyone with a discerning eye can see that. You are the Futu of the human race. Therefore, I'm not sure if they will agree. Silence, endless silence. Both of them didn't speak. They also knew that this request was a little too difficult. Actually, it's not impossible to give it a try. After all, you are someone who has been summoned by Alchemy's Saint Rome. Moreover, the aptitude that you have displayed has already surpassed the boundaries of your race. I think that in order to be able to see the final glorious appearance, the Alchemist Alliance might agree. Moreover, will you be satisfied if you don't give it a try? Hearing this, Lu Feng finally let out a deep breath and revealed a trace of a smile. President, you are right. If I don't get a try, how can I be satisfied? After shattering the independent space, the two of them slowly walked out. When they saw the two of them, everyone knew that they had already decided on what they wanted. Chapter 419. Taradas walked over to Lu Feng with a smile. Fudo, have you decided what you want? Lu Feng nodded gently and said directly, Your Highness Grand Master Taradas, I've already thought about it. However, before I ask for the reward, I would like to exchange something with you. Exchange? Taradas was stunned for a moment before he nodded gently. However, there was a faint smile on his face. In his opinion, Lu Feng wouldn't have anything good. After all, as the first elder of the Alchemist Union, he had seen everything. However, when he thought about Lu Feng's potential and future achievements, Taradas made up his mind. No matter what the exchange was, he would agree to it. Upon seeing Taradas' expression, Lu Feng could also guess what this elder was thinking. In fact, this situation was also within Lu Feng's expectations. After all, as the first elder of the Alchemist Union, Taradas had seen too many things. On the surface, Luo Yunyang's identity was just a freakish alchemist from the human race. Although his potential was shocking, he was still too young, and the things he had accumulated were definitely limited. After pondering for a moment, Lu Feng took out 3 crystals from his personal space. When he saw the crystals, Wang Guwei was slightly stunned. However, he quickly revealed a look of contemplation and doubt. When he saw the crystals in Lu Feng's hands, the other grandmasters were also puzzled. They naturally knew that the crystals that Lu Feng had taken out were inheritance crystals. The greatest use of such things was to pass down cultivation techniques. However, as alchemists, they weren't very interested in the cultivation techniques of psychic masters and martialists. Taradas looked at the 3 crystals in Lu Feng's hands. At first, he didn't pay much attention to them. However, after observing them for a while, a solemn expression finally appeared on his face. When Lu Feng brought them in front of him, Taradas was even more excited. Grandmaster Yiniga was the same. The two of them had already recognized them. They looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. Taking a deep breath, Taradas looked at Lu Feng and said solemnly, Futu, are you planning to exchange for the other 3? Lu Feng smiled and nodded. He slowly said, Grandmaster Taradas, as you expected, I want to use the 3 crystals in my hands to exchange for the other 3 divisions of the Alchemist Alliance. Pill Sutra. Silence. There was another period of endless silence in the void. Except for the 3 non-humankind masters who had walked away and the 2 human masters, the other 6 masters all looked at Lu Feng with an extremely difficult look. These people had already guessed that Lu Feng possessed the Pill Sutra. However, according to their thinking, the pill mantra in Lu Feng's hands should be a copy obtained through other channels, and the original source still belonged to the Alchemist Guild. However, after hearing Lu Feng's words, they understood. They knew that Lu Feng's Pill Sutra was definitely different from the Alchemist Guild's Pill Sutra. Otherwise, he wouldn't have proposed an exchange. Looking at the 3 crystals floating in Lu Feng's hands, even an idiot would have guessed it. Taradas smiled faintly. His voice was filled with an extremely strange feeling. His voice slowly drifted over, as expected of a monstrous alchemist. Existences like you are all favored by the heavens and earth. Your providence is incomparably terrifying. It seems like this is indeed the case. A long sigh. The Alchemist Guild was a colossus, but after half an era of collecting, they finally managed to gather the 3 Pill Sutra. However, Lu Feng alone, a young person, controlled the equivalent of the Alchemist Guild's entire Pill Sutra. This made them speechless. I agree to your terms of exchange. After a moment of silence, Taradas' voice slowly rang out. Even without the 3 Pill Sutra, as long as Lu Feng wanted to see the 3 Pill Sutra in the Alchemist Guild's Pill Sutra, there wouldn't be any problem. After all, the Pill Sutra was the commonwealth of all the alchemists in the universe. As long as one wanted to, they could read it after passing the review. Moreover, Lu Feng took out the same 3 copies of the Pill Mantra. One had to know that the Pill Sutra was the most precious thing in the Alchemist Guild. Lu Feng smiled. Lu Feng wasn't surprised at all that Talatis had agreed. Looking at Lu Feng's smile, Talatis also revealed a happy smile. Since he had unexpectedly obtained 3 copies of the Pill Mantra, then the Pill Master Guild now had a total of 6 copies of the Pill Mantra. Although they didn't know the exact number of Pill Sutra, according to the speculation of those ancient sage Tao alchemists, the number of Pill Sutra might not be small, but it wouldn't be very large either. It was estimated that there wouldn't be more than 10 Pill Sutras. Even if there were 10 Pill Sutras, they controlled 6 Pill Sutras, which was more than half. Now that they had obtained 3 more copies of the Pill Scripture, they were one step closer to completely collecting the greatest scripture of the Pill Tao. Futu, state your conditions. Talatis was in a very good mood now. In his opinion, Lu Feng was becoming more and more pleasing to the eye. Therefore, Talatis had already decided that no matter what Lu Feng's request was, he would try his best to satisfy it. Lu Feng looked at Talatis and remained silent for a moment. Soon, a look of determination appeared in his eyes. Lu Feng raised his head and looked at Talatis. He said slowly and solemnly, "Grandmaster Talatis, my reward is not something I want. I just hope to get an opportunity. An opportunity to cultivate for 3 days." Talatis looked at Lu Feng in confusion. He didn't understand what a chance to cultivate for 3 days had to do with this reward. However, a moment later, he seemed to have thought of something and his expression changed. Apart from him, the other grandmasters behind him also had the same expression. They were all silent as they looked at Talatis quietly. The corners of their mouths twitched slightly. However, Talatis still asked, "You're talking about the realm of time." After saying this, Talatis looked at Wangui. He knew that the Alchemist Alliance had news about the realm of time. Apart from the Grandmasters in the Alchemist Alliance, only the Grandmasters outside knew about it. Wangui saw Talatis' expression and smiled faintly. Seeing this scene, Talatis understood that Wangui had told Lu Feng about it. At this moment, Dilatus had fallen into a difficult situation. If what Lu Feng asked for was a divine item, even a peak grade 8 divine item wouldn't be a big deal. After all, although that item was precious, the Alchemist Alliance still had it. Moreover, Lu Feng had just given them 3 copies of the Alchemist Scripture. This was equivalent to the entire Alchemist Alliance. Therefore, if they only gave a peak grade 8 divine item, although they were a little reluctant, they would still give it to him. However, it was different now, because Lu Feng wanted to enter the realm of time to cultivate for 3 days. Every time the realm of time opened, 3 peak grade 8 divine items were required. These 3 days were equivalent to 3 peak grade 8 divine items. In this way, Lu Feng's request was equivalent to asking for 6 peak grade 8 divine items. Peak grade 8 divine items. This is something that even the virtual king, who is above the 5th level, would be moved. He would want to fight for it like crazy. Hearing Talatis' words, Lu Feng only responded in silence. He naturally knew the value of a peak grade 8 divine item. However, it was a pity that other than entering the realm of time, he really didn't need anything else. "Futu, can't you change your request to something else?" Talatis said with a hint of bashfulness. Previously, he had asked Lu Feng to ask for anything. However, now that Lu Feng said it, he became evasive and evasive. He wanted Lu Feng to change his mind. Such a matter undoubtedly made one of the most honorable people in the path of alchemy feel very ashamed. Although it was a little pitiful that such an alchemy grandmaster like Talatis was in such a state, Lu Feng knew that other than this, he really didn't need anything else. After hesitating for a moment, Lu Feng finally shook his head. After seeing Lu Feng's appearance, Talatis fell silent. At this moment, the grandmasters around them were also behaving the same way. They were all silent and looked at Talatis quietly. Time passed by minute. Talatis, who was standing above the void, was unusually speechless. He truly liked a monstrous genius like Lu Feng. In addition, Lu Feng had just given the Alchemist Alliance 3 copies of the Pill Scripture. It could be said that Lu Feng's request wasn't too much. However, a peak grade 8 divine item was too precious. Even for those peak overlords, not every ancient virtual king above grade 5 had something refined from a peak grade 8 divine item. Of course, if it was only one, Taradas would be ruthless and give it to him. However, Lu Feng's request required 6. This number really made him feel a great deal of pressure. Just as Taradas was hesitating and his expression kept changing, his expression suddenly changed. His expression suddenly froze, and in the next moment, a trace of relief and excitement appeared in his eyes. Finally, after his expression changed, Taradas didn't hesitate and walked directly to Lu Feng's side. At this moment, Lu Feng only looked at Taradas nervously. Lu Feng knew that he would soon find out if he could enter the realm of time to cultivate. Taradas looked at Lu Feng and said directly, "Futu, I agree to your request." Hearing this, not only was Lu Feng stunned, but also Wang Gui and the others. Although they hoped that Lu Feng could enter the realm of time to cultivate, they also knew that such a request was too difficult to achieve. Therefore, when Taradas agreed, they were all stunned. Looking at Lu Feng's expression, Taradas smiled slightly and seemed to be teasing him. Just now, if it wasn't for Alchemy's Saint Rome, who was the true overlord of the Alchemist Alliance, who had sent him a message, even if Taradas was the current number 1 elder of the Alchemist Alliance, he wouldn't have dared to agree. After all, 6 peak grade 8 divine items were too shocking. However, it was different now. Since Alchemy's Saint Rome, the true overlord of the Alchemist Alliance, had spoken, then everything was no longer a problem. Looking at Lu Feng's expression of disbelief, Taradas laughed and asked, "Futu, when do you plan to enter?" Chapter 420. Lu Feng's expression slowly returned to normal. Soon, he understood the problem. After all, Lu Feng had clearly seen Taradas's expression just now. He understood that Taradas's instantaneous change was definitely because he had received some kind of instruction or guarantee. In the entire Alchemist Alliance, the only person who could give him such authority was the real Alchemist Sage Rome. Actually, Lu Feng was also filled with countless doubts about Alchemist Sage Rome. Although he heard from Alchemist Sage Rome that Alchemist Sage Lu asked him to help him, Lu Feng was still suspicious. After all, Alchemist Sage Lu was just a human. He shouldn't be able to make Alchemist Sage Rome make such a big change. One had to know that in Alchemist Sage Rome's space, Alchemist Sage Rome almost wanted to protect him. However, although he was suspicious, Lu Feng didn't think about anything else. Because he knew that if Alchemist Sage Rome really had any ulterior motives, he would have already made a move. If he planned to make a move in the future, then Lu Feng was even more fearless. He was the Emperor Lu Feng. He was bound to reach the peak of existence in the future. No matter what kind of scheme it was, he would crush it with a single punch. Alchemist Taradas, I want to enter that place as soon as I get the other 3 Pills Sutra, 3 days. With the time acceleration of 200 times, it would be 600 days. That was close to 2 years. Lu Feng believed that as long as he comprehended it from scratch, 600 days shouldn't be much of a difference. Hearing Lu Feng's words, Taradas nodded lightly. However, after a slight hesitation, he said solemnly, "Futu, I know that you also comprehended the Pill Sutra. You also know quite a bit about the Pill Mantra. You should understand that if you want to comprehend the second Pill Scripture after comprehending the first one, the difficulty will increase by many times." It was very difficult to obtain the recognition of the 2 Pill Sutra souls. Taradas said this because he didn't want Lu Feng to be too depressed after failing. When Lu Feng heard this, he nodded his head gently. With an incomprehensible smile, he said slowly, "I know all of this, Your Majesty. However, I still want to give it a try. No matter what, I can still afford 3 days of time." The Immortal King had 2 Pill Sutras. He told himself that he had comprehended all of them. Since the Immortal King could do it, Lu Feng was confident that he could do it too. He didn't think that he was worse than the Immortal King or anyone else. Taradas knew that a monster like Lu Feng, once he made a decision, he wouldn't be swayed. What he said just now was only because he didn't want Lu Feng to waste the rare 600 days on the Pill Sutra. However, when he saw Lu Feng's resolute attitude, he didn't say anything else. All right, in that case, after the rewards are distributed, I will take you directly to the realm of time and let you enter to comprehend it. A hint of excitement appeared on Lu Feng's face as he nodded gently. The rewards were distributed very quickly. Originally, the top 10 of this grand competition would have very terrifying rewards, especially the top 3, which could be said to be shocking. Unfortunately, Lu Feng had changed his request, and the Immortal King had left immediately. He didn't care about the rewards of the Alchemist Alliance at all. Therefore, the real way to distribute the rewards was from the third place. The third place was a Grade 8 divine object. However, it was only an ordinary Grade 8 divine object. Even so, it was enough to shock the world. After all, the price of a Grade 8 divine object was at least tens of billions of divine object points. This was hundreds or thousands of times more than the wealth of many true gods. The remaining victors also received shocking rewards. Even the 10th place had received an ordinary Grade 7 divine object. After waiting for the rewards to be distributed, Taratus said a few words of encouragement to the many contestants. Unfortunately, the effect wasn't very good. Everyone had expected this to happen. Those who could participate in the Alchemy Master Competition of the younger generation were all true geniuses. In particular, those who could become geniuses had glory and dignity that others could never understand. However, they had been beaten black and blue by Lu Feng and the Immortal King in the field that they were most proud of. How could these people still care about these rewards? After saying this, Taratus looked at the many existences and his voice rang out again. The Alchemy Master Competition has officially begun. I think all of you are very familiar with the process of the Alchemy Master Competition. Therefore, this time, I won't explain anything. This time, 11 great alchemy masters have come. According to the traditional practice, these 11 great alchemy masters will impart knowledge separately. Each person will have 1 day, and it will last for 11 days. Hearing this, the ordinary warriors and psychic masters didn't think much of it. However, the alchemists could no longer suppress the excitement in their hearts. From the alchemy apprentices to the grade 6 alchemy masters, they all cheered loudly. For them, these 11 days would be more useful than 10 years of hard work. The time of the first lecture is set to be in the morning 4 days later. The location will still be in the Medicine God Square. Therefore, those who like to listen can come here early. After saying this, Taratus didn't stay any longer. He turned around and left. Hearing this, Lu Feng also revealed a strange emotion. For days. This time, it would actually start in 4 days. If Lu Feng didn't know, then he wouldn't have felt anything strange. However, Wang Gui had already told him everything about the Alchemy Master Competition, so Lu Feng also knew that such a master's lecture would usually start the next day. Therefore, the time was set to be 4 days later. It was probably also to take care of him. They left the Medicine God Square directly. The group of 9 people directly used their great magic and disappeared from the Medicine God Square. When they appeared next, they were already in front of the main entrance of the Alchemist Alliance, which was thousands of miles away. Futu, the 3 alchemy sutras you need are placed in this central building. If you want to open the realm of time, you also need to get the divine item here. Lu Feng nodded gently and followed behind the 8 masters directly into the central building. After entering, the few of them didn't use any space magic. It wasn't that they didn't want to, but they couldn't. Countless restrictions were set up in the central building. Disturbing time and space was one of them. Standing on the moving track, Taratus got a square electronic device from who knows where. He turned on the electronic device and entered some specific instructions. Lu Feng felt the moving track under his feet begin to speed up violently. In the blink of an eye, they had already run an innumerable distance. In this huge and complex maze-like central building, the 9 of them stood for nearly 30 minutes before finally arriving at their destination. If the test room Lu Feng had seen before was huge, then the room in front of him could be described as a castle. This was a terrifying room the size of a real castle. Just the height alone probably occupied hundreds of floors. What appeared in front of Lu Feng was a door. However, this door didn't look like a door that an indoor building should have. Taradas revealed a satisfied smile when he saw Lu Feng's slightly shocked expression. Today he had been hit a little too hard by this monster. If he had a chance to regain some sense of balance, it would feel really good. How is it, Fudu? Is it very shocking? Lu Feng nodded his head gently. In terms of size, the room in front of him definitely couldn't be compared to the main entrance of the Alchemist Alliance's theme building. However, one shouldn't forget that this was an indoor building. Lu Feng really found it hard to imagine how such an architectural miracle was built. This is the place where the Alchemist Alliance stores divine items and valuable items. Lu Feng nodded gently. According to his estimation of the journey, this should be the centermost area of the central building. On the way here, Lu Feng also felt the difference in the surroundings. There seemed to be ancient magic arrays engraved around the treasury. The degree of power was indescribable. Moreover, with the accumulation of the Alchemist Alliance over countless years, Lu Feng believed that the sturdiness of this place could be easily destroyed by alchemists of the King Realm. As for existences that had reached the level of life and death quasi-king, or even higher, such as the supreme being of the universe and the supreme being of the other path, that was impossible. After all, to fight against such existences, it was necessary to use a powerhouse of the same level to do so. Okay, go on in. Once you finish copying the 3 pill scriptures, I will bring you to the realm of time and cultivate for 3 days. After saying this, Taradas hit the terrifying giant door with countless inexplicable mysteries. Then, he took out several crystals that were full of mysteries and embedded them in the many grooves of the door. Only then did the door slowly open. Lu Feng could understand such a complicated method of opening the door. It was just a peak 8th grade divine item, but the degree of its preciousness was simply indescribable. And there seemed to be more than one 8th grade divine item inside. In addition to the divine items, there was also the pill scripture, which was a great alchemy method that was comparable to a supreme being's cultivation method. It could be said that this treasury that stored countless precious items was tightly guarded. It didn't matter how tightly it was guarded. After a moment, the door trembled. Just when Lu Feng thought that the door was about to open, a ray of light suddenly appeared from the door. This ray of light shone on the bodies of the 9 people and scanned them one by one. The few of them didn't move, and Lu Feng naturally didn't move. The light swept across Lu Feng's body. From this, Lu Feng actually felt like he was being spied on. Lu Feng didn't like this feeling. Silently, he had already used the life chart cultivation method that Jehua Wiyue had taught him. When the power of the life chart was completely revealed, the feeling of being spied on also disappeared. At this time, the scanning was completed. Suddenly, a sound came from the door. Identity confirmed. There are more than 4 Grandmasters. It can be opened. It can be opened. This was a synthesized voice. Hearing this, Lu Feng was dumbfounded. Although this central building was full of the aura of technology, Lu Feng still couldn't see any hint of technology in many key places. After all, although technology was terrifying and could change everything, in the hearts of those cultivators, technology was still very fragile in the face of peak combat power. However, here, in the most important area of the Alchemist Alliance, Lu Feng saw the shadow of technology. Furthermore, it was located in a very crucial position. This made Lu Feng feel a little strange. Chapter 421. This is the top technology of the celestial race, the soul recognition system. This system can recognize the souls of any powerhouse below the level 5 virtual king. Therefore, it is much more powerful than the space movement technology. However, because this technology is not widely used in war, although it is the top technology, there are not many prohibitions. Therefore, the Alchemist Alliance easily obtained it. Lu Feng nodded gently. At this moment, he was even more curious about the technology of the celestial race. As one of the top overlords of the universe, the celestial race did not have many top warriors and psychics. What they were really powerful about was technology. Previously, Lu Feng thought that technology was only useful for those below the demigod level. However, he now knew that he had been too naive. Not to mention anything else, just the soul recognition system was enough to shock the world. It could actually recognize the souls of existences below the level 5 virtual king. This was something that Lu Feng had never imagined. One had to know that the existence of a level 5 virtual king was already the top foundation of a race. It could be called an ancient virtual king powerhouse. Lu Feng's senior brother Li Tianlai, the successor of the Dongru Great Emperor, was actually an existence of the virtual king. His strength was equivalent to that of a level 5 virtual king. Did you not expect that the power of technology could be so powerful? Seeing Lu Feng's silence, Wang Gui walked to Lu Feng's side and asked. Lu Feng was taken aback for a moment before he gently nodded his head. I really did not expect it. As far as I know, the existence of a demigod is not something that technology can fight against. Once you become a god, you'll be completely above technology. Wang Gui smiled and shook his head gently. What you think is too simple. If technology was really only this powerful, the celestial race would not have become one of the top overlords of the world. Although the celestial race was not the strongest overlord race, they were not the weakest either. The celestial race's biggest reliance was technology. You can imagine if the power of technology was really that weak. Then, how could the celestial race compete with those overlord races with many gods and even kings? Lu Feng had also thought of this point. He nodded his head lightly. Although the limit of technology can't let people become a divine king, its ultimate power is enough to annihilate an ordinary virtual king. The soul recognition system you see is the most inconspicuous system of the celestial race's ultimate technology. In the celestial race's soul system, the soul shock soul system, which can be called a disaster level. Once the power, it can even kill an ordinary virtual king in an instant. Think about it. If this soul shock system was changed from a single target attack to a group attack, how terrifying will its power be? After thinking for a while, Lu Feng sucked in a deep breath of cold air. The soul shock system that can kill a virtual king in an instant, although the power will be reduced a lot if it is changed to a group attack. Lu Feng believes that even if it is reduced, it is still enough to kill a god or even a true god-level existence. One attack to kill a god-level expert in an area, just thinking about it is terrifying. A god-level expert is not an ordinary existence. It is a terrifying foundation of a race. In the human race, there are only 50 gods on the surface. If the soul shock system is used, all the gods on the surface of the human race will be finished. The soul shock system is just a more powerful weapon system of the soul system. You must know that the celestial race's technological weapons, other than the soul system, the space system, the life system, the rule system, and so on, are all comparable to or even surpass the soul system. Once the war technology is all activated, the celestial race's terror can really make the universe tremble. These are all things that Lu Feng didn't know before. In his impression, technological weapons are nothing more than weapons of mass destruction, such as interstellar railguns. Now it seems that he thought too simply. Well, you don't have to think too much. Although the celestial race and the human race are not as close as the war god race, there is no hatred between us. Although the celestial race's technological weapons are terrifying, cultivators also have tools and secret treasures. If they are assisted by refined divine objects, they will not be at any disadvantage against technological weapons. At this point, Lu Feng finally came to a realization. He knew that he had forgotten about the auxiliary tools of cultivators. For Lu Feng, the strongest thing is his physical body, which is his will. As for weapons, he has never used them since his debut. Therefore, Lu Feng inadvertently ignored the existence of tools. Now that he heard Wang Gui say this, Lu Feng yearned for these auxiliary tools for the first time. Okay, the door is completely open. We can go in now. Taradis's voice could be heard from the front. Lu Feng didn't hesitate and followed Wang Gui and the other masters into the huge room. The 8 masters looked at Lu Feng with a mocking smile. Just like Taladis, they were shocked by Lu Feng's strength. Lu Feng's strength was just like Taladis's. They were shocked by Lu Feng's strength. Therefore, this time, they also wanted to see Lu Feng's shocked expression. Sure enough, as they had expected, Lu Feng's eyes were full of shock. In fact, they could all imagine this. After all, when they had first entered this place, they had also had the same expression. Lu Feng opened his mouth slightly, but he realized that he really couldn't say anything. The number of divine objects piled up in front of him was too terrifying. Lu Feng didn't recognize many types of divine objects. However, all the divine objects he could recognize at this moment were divine objects above grade 7, without exception. Among them, he even saw some grade 8 divine objects. Any random divine object here was worth 10 trillion divine object points. The precious ones were worth at least 100 trillion. What shocked Lu Feng the most was not the quality of the divine objects here, but the quality of the divine objects. The number of divine objects here could be described as mountains and seas. Before entering, Lu Feng could already feel the vastness of this room. However, after entering, Lu Feng realized that he had been wrong. The interior of this room could no longer be described as vast. At this moment, he finally understood that this was an independent space. The interior of the entire treasury was an independent space created by an expert using a special ability. If it weren't for this place, there wouldn't be such an endless space. Futu, are you shocked? Lu Feng didn't put on any pretense. He just nodded his head. Before entering, I'd already guessed that there would be a mountain of divine objects here. However, after entering, I realized that it wasn't a mountain of divine objects. It was a sea. There was a sea of divine objects. These divine objects were all grade 7 and above divine objects. In the entire universe, grade 7 divine objects were considered the pinnacle of divine objects. As a grade 7 divine item, even a true god would want to take action and snatch it madly. However, grade 7 divine objects were like trash in this place. They were placed casually. How could they have the status that a grade 7 divine object should have? At some point, Grandmaster Yinika had already arrived beside Lu Feng. He looked at the sea of divine objects and said slowly, "These divine objects have been accumulated by the Alchemist Alliance since the beginning of this era. It can be said that any divine object that appeared in this era, whether it still exists or not, can be found here." A hint of pride appeared on Grandmaster Yintika's face when he said this. Other pinnacle overlord races might have accumulated more wealth than this place. However, the variety of items accumulated by those pinnacle overlord races couldn't be compared to the Alchemist Alliance. The divine objects they had accumulated included all types of divine objects that had appeared in this era. They were definitely unparalleled in this era. The other pinnacle overlord races couldn't possibly compare to them. All right, let's open the core treasury. The Alchemy Sutra is there. Lu Feng was slightly taken aback by Dilatus's words. However, he quickly understood. A hint of realization and shock flashed across his eyes. Lu Feng was a little confused when he saw these divine objects. Although the divine objects he saw were all true pinnacle, supreme grade divine objects, there weren't any top-notch divine objects among them. For example, there were grade 8 divine objects. Furthermore, there weren't any grade 9 divine objects among them. Grade 9 divine objects were things that even the Divine King would be tempted by. They were the most terrifying divine objects in the universe. However, Lu Feng also understood that the Alchemist Alliance definitely had grade 9 divine objects. However, not only were there no grade 9 divine objects here, but there wasn't even a single grade 8 divine object. This made Lu Feng confused. However, after hearing Dilatus's words, Lu Feng finally understood. It turned out that those pinnacle divine objects were indeed placed in more hidden places. Upon hearing Dilatus's words, Grandmaster Yintika and the other two Grandmasters of the Alchemist Alliance took a step forward and arrived in front of Dilatus. In an instant, the four of them opened up their own personal space at the same time. In an instant, four sparkling lights appeared in their hands. Lu Feng's heart trembled slightly when he sensed the terrifying fluctuations coming from the four sparkling lights. He could feel the terrifying power contained within the sparkling lights. It was an indescribable feeling of fear that made one tremble in fear. "This is," Wang Gui smiled and explained, "this is the key to the Alchemist Alliance's extreme treasure vault. Of course, this thing is also a divine object. Furthermore, it's a grade 9 divine object. A grade 9 divine object. This was a grade 9 divine object." Up until now, Lu Feng had heard of the legends of grade 9 divine objects several times. However, this was his first time seeing one. Every grade 9 divine object has a special function. It can be said that any grade 9 divine object can become a supreme divine weapon with a little refinement. This grade 9 divine object is connected to a space-time. It's a special space-time where the flow of time is the slowest. If the time realm accelerates time, then this is the deceleration of time. Lu Feng's eyes were filled with shock. This was the first time he had heard of time acceleration. Actually, time acceleration is a very special existence. If you spend a day here, hundreds of years might have passed in the universe. Although this kind of space has no use for cultivation, it is perfect for storing things. Chapter 422. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. It was as Wang Gui had said. If the time acceleration was used to preserve things that were easily decayed, it would be the best. The 9th grade divine item itself is a miniature or a projection of that space. Ever since it was discovered by the ancestors of the Alchemist Alliance, this divine item has been refined into the Alliance's ultimate treasure vault. None of the 4 divine items have the slightest effect on their own. However, once the 4 of them are combined and the 4 mysterious runes are used to activate them, the ultimate space will be opened. After hearing this, Lu Feng nodded his head in realization. He had not expected the Alchemist Alliance to be so cautious. It could not even be described as cautious. If one wanted to enter the ultimate treasure vault, one had to obtain the 4 divine items and the 4 mysterious runes to activate them. Once one of them was missing, it would be impossible to open it. In this way, the ultimate treasure vault's safety would be guaranteed to the greatest extent. Yes, this is how it should be. After all, the ultimate treasure vault is definitely filled with 8th grade divine items. There is even a supreme technique like the alchemy scripture, which is comparable to a supreme being cultivation technique. No matter how strict it is, it should be done. Lu Feng could also understand the Alchemist Alliance's approach. Unlike those pinnacle races, they had countless supreme experts of various races guarding their treasure vaults. The Alchemist Alliance was not an organization that was good at fighting. Their strength lay in refining elixirs. Once someone set their eyes on them, these alchemists would not have much power to resist. It was only right to have such strict measures in place. The independent space was instantly opened. The terrifying power swept in all directions in an instant, causing Lu Feng's expression to change drastically. At this moment, Wang Gui, who was beside him, suddenly acted and completely protected Lu Feng. Sensing this change, Lu Feng cast a grateful look at Wang Gui. Futu, this is the dignity of a 9th grade divine item. The power itself is extremely terrifying. Although it is unintentionally emitted, ordinary existences will tremble in fear when they come into contact with it. Even a heavenly god would be completely suppressed if they offended such a majesty. Hearing this explanation, Lu Feng nodded gently. Lu Feng had never heard of such a thing in the past. As far as he knew, divine objects were divine objects, and they were ultimately used by living beings. However, from the looks of it now, after reaching the 9th grade, divine items were also endlessly terrifying. Even heavenly deities can be suppressed in an instant, Lu Feng muttered to himself. Hearing this, Wang Gui nodded gently. The space was completely opened. At this time, Taradas walked to Lu Feng's side and said, Futu, take out the 3 pill scriptures. After I make a copy, I'll send it to the final treasury and take out all the things you need. Hearing this, Lu Feng did not hesitate and directly took out the 3 pill scriptures from his personal space. After obtaining Lu Feng's 3 copies of the pill scripture, Taradas also faintly had an excited expression. After all, this was the pill scriptures. Even with the terrifying foundation of the Alchemist Alliance, it took a lot of time to collect these 3. But now, it had doubled all of a sudden. With such achievements, he would definitely become a legendary existence. Only those with the imprint key can enter. So, you guys can wait for me outside for a while. Lu Feng nodded gently. Hearing this, he was even more amazed by the 9th grade divine object's ability. Not only could an object refined by a 9th grade divine object open up a space where time could be slowed down indefinitely, but could also be called a temporary pause. If one wanted to enter, they had to have the imprint key. Lu Feng had never encountered such a thing. However, he also knew that these people would not lie to him. Therefore, Lu Feng nodded gently. Taradas was the only one who entered the final treasury. Everyone else chose to wait outside. Even the other 3 elders did the same. The waiting did not take long. After about 20 minutes, Taradas had already walked out. At this time, Taradas was carrying 6 pieces of crystal stones in his hand. Seeing these 6 pieces of crystal stones, Lu Feng was also faintly excited. 3 of them were the 3 pill scriptures that he had given to Taradas. The remaining 3 pieces must belong to the other 3 pill scriptures that belong to the Alchemist Alliance. Taradas went to Lu Feng's side and handed him the 6 crystals. He said slowly, Futu, these are the 3 pill sutras that have appeared in the universe. Lu Feng nodded and said, Futu, these are the 3 pill sutras that have appeared in the universe. Hearing this, not only Lu Feng, but even the alchemy grandmasters showed a fiery expression. Of course, this expression was only because of the title. They did not care about the 6 pieces of crystal stones in Lu Feng's hand. After all, with their status, if they wanted to read the pill scriptures, they could do so at any time. However, these people also understood that with their existence, it was impossible for the soul of the pill scriptures to acknowledge them. After all, they had already tried countless times. Therefore, in a very short period of time, these people's expressions completely calmed down. Thank you very much, Your Highness Grandmaster Taradas. Lu Feng's eyes flashed with excitement. He knew the importance of these 6 pill scriptures. He had only grasped the alchemy mantra, but the pills he could refine had already reached an unimaginable level. Once he grasped all 6 alchemy mantras, Lu Feng couldn't imagine how far he could go. After all, he had primitive immortal power. Of course, Lu Feng also understood that he might not be able to control all of them. Of course, if it was only 1 or 2, it was not a problem. After all, the Immortal King controlled 2 pill scriptures. Lu Feng admitted that he was not inferior to the Immortal King. So, if the Immortal King could do it, he could do it too. Looking at Taradas, Lu Feng hesitated slightly, but did not speak. Seeing Lu Feng's expression, Taradas laughed. He naturally knew what Lu Feng was thinking. If it was him, with such a shocking talent and a peerless grimoire, he would also have the same expression. Looking at Lu Feng, Taradas did not hesitate and said directly, Futu, I will take you to the realm of time in a while. But are you sure you don't need a rest? After going through a grand competition, Lu Feng put in a shocking amount of energy. And at the end, Lu Feng even defied the heavens. He actually used the ancient taboo to develop and reverse the laws of heaven and earth. Although he returned to his previous state in the end, that kind of torture was an extremely terrifying blow to the soul. So, although there might be no problem with the body, there would be some sequelae in the soul. Therefore, in Taradas' opinion, Lu Feng should rest for a day first. If he entered the realm of time, then the effect would be better. But hearing this, Lu Feng just shook his head gently. The consumption of the grand competition was equivalent to nothing to him. And at the last moment, the indescribable torture to others was not that much of a shock to Lu Feng's soul. Back in the massacre abyss, the final life and death test was the real pain and torture. Every death and rebirth appeared from the depths of the soul. The torture was so strong that even Lu Feng's divine realm was annihilated. Compared to the hundreds of millions of life and death tests, this degree of taboo backlash was really nothing. So, although Lu Feng was not in his peak state now, there was no problem if he continued to cultivate. Looking at Lu Feng's appearance, Taradas knew that Lu Feng should have made up his mind. Although he thought that Lu Feng should rest, Taradas obviously had to respect Lu Feng's decision. So, after a slight sigh, Taradas turned around and walked forward. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. At this moment, a voice sounded in his ears. Futu, the realm of time, is the most important thing in our alchemist alliance. It is not casually placed outside. It exists in this treasury. Come with me. The voice came from Taradas. Upon hearing this, Lu Feng nodded silently as he understood what was going on. Indeed, strictly speaking, the realm of time was more precious than the realm of time. If it wasn't for the huge consumption, perhaps the entire universe would go crazy. It was indeed safer to place it in this treasury. Following closely behind Taradas, the two of them headed towards the deepest part of the cave. This walk took a full 5 minutes. One must know that Lu Feng was not walking by himself. He was carried by Taradas' magical ability. This speed was thousands of times faster than Lu Feng's running in his peak state. But even so, he spent a full 5 minutes to finally reach his destination. Along the way, all of them were divine objects above the 7th grade. And this time, Lu Feng also understood how terrifying the number of divine objects here was. When they stopped, the two of them were already standing in front of an ancient altar. Seeing this altar, Lu Feng's eyes were slightly stunned. Then, a slightly strange expression appeared on his face. Futu, this altar is actually the realm of time. At the top of this altar is the entrance to the realm of time. Lu Feng was silent, incomparably silent. At this moment, although his eyes had calmed down, his heart was filled with incomparable complexity. It could even be said that he was shocked. Although this altar had shrunk countless times, Lu Feng could still vaguely see many familiar places. Regarding this altar, Lu Feng had an extremely deep impression, because back then he experienced the test of will, the test of life and death, and the illusion of 9 lives in the same place as this altar. This was the ancient square altar in the deepest part of ancient Square Star. This altar was also the place where the Alchemy Sutra and 2 other strange things were placed. Chapter 423. Seeing Lu Feng's silence, Taradas assumed that Lu Feng was just confused and shocked after seeing it for the first time. He said softly, "This altar is a miracle left behind by the real alchemy era. No one knows what it is made of. However, after countless years of research, the seniors of the Alchemist Alliance finally discovered that this altar seems to have many uses. Among them, the most shocking one is the realm of time on the altar." In an instant, Lu Feng revealed a look of shock. This was true shock, and it was not an act or anything else. Unfortunately, Taradas would never understand why Lu Feng was so shocked. The alchemy era left behind a shocking item that was once buried deep in the alchemy god square. Later, it was discovered by chance. In the end, the ancestors of the Alchemist Alliance researched its specific use. This altar is the realm of time. Such a thing is indeed unimaginable. However, this is real, Taradas explained slowly. After the shock, Lu Feng focused all his attention on Taradas' words. After Taradas finished speaking, Lu Feng fell into deep thought again. At this moment, Lu Feng's heart was incomparably certain. He knew that this altar was definitely related to the ancient Feng clan's altar. After all, it was hard to believe that there was no connection between the 2 altars that were exactly the same. Lu Feng also gradually discovered something. This altar was left behind by the alchemy era. Although Lu Feng did not know how long the ancient Feng clan's altar had existed and when it was built, he was now certain. It was definitely related to the alchemy era. After all, the alchemy scripture was placed on it. In the huge Futu pagoda, Lu Feng saw countless pills. That was truly a sea of medicinal pills. Lu Feng believed that even the Alchemy Alliance, the pillar of the Alchemy Alliance, would not be able to possess such a huge amount of pills. However, what was the connection between the two? After thinking for a while, Lu Feng really could not think of any possibility. Moreover, Lu Feng felt that the ancient Feng clan's terrifying altar was a little strange. This was because he felt that the altar was not simply a place to provide a test. Its real function seemed to be to suppress the shocking crack behind the altar together with the three divine king of the underworld and the other divine kings. However, the altar here opened a realm of time, which made Lu Feng endlessly puzzled. After thinking for a long time, Lu Feng still could not think of anything. Lu Feng shook his head helplessly and stopped thinking about it. By now, Lu Feng knew too many secrets. However, these secrets brought with them countless perplexities. These perplexities could be called the truly shocking secrets of the universe. Perhaps even the Divine King did not know about them. If the Divine King was like this, Lu Feng would be even more incapable. Therefore, Lu Feng could only take one step at a time and stop thinking about these things. Seeing Lu Feng's appearance and seeing Lu Feng's puzzled expression, Taradas clearly misunderstood. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. The true function of this altar has never been completely understood. However, one thing is certain. This altar can convert power. Convert power? Lu Feng looked at Taradas with even more puzzlement, not understanding what he meant. It is converting power. You should know the price to open the realm of time, right? Lu Feng nodded slightly and said directly, to open the realm of time, you need 3 peak grade 8 divine items. And to cultivate in it for a day, you need 1 peak grade 8 divine item. At this point, Lu Feng suddenly understood. He looked at Taradas and said, Master Taradas, do you need those divine items? Is this altar? Taradas smiled and nodded. Indeed, those divine items need to be sacrificed to this altar. The altar will convert those peak grade 8 divine items into pure power and finally use it to open the realm of time. Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded slightly. However, a moment later, a trace of shock and realization appeared in his eyes. Could it be that everything should be like this? Lu Feng had already thought of it. Converting power. If this small altar had such power, then the altar of the ancient Feng clan, which was countless times larger, would probably be the same. However, the small altar required peak grade 8 divine items, but the power required by the huge altar was definitely not something that ordinary divine items could provide. Perhaps even a true peak grade 9 divine item would not be able to do this. After all, the ancient Feng clan was a clan that had existed for a long time. How could they have countless peak grade 9 divine items? It was only a peak grade 9 divine item. It was already good enough that it could be activated. It would be impossible to maintain it for a long time. However, just because divine items could not do it did not mean that other things could not do it. For example, martial art avatars. The martial art avatars of the Divine King were equivalent to the existence of the Divine King's mythological forbidden territory. After all, whether it was the Yellow Springs Monument, the Tai Sovereign Sword, or the Tian Tua Lynx, they were all physical martial art avatars of the Divine King. Their existence was equivalent to the 3 Divine Kings' original bodies in the mythological forbidden territory. If the 3 Divine King worked together, it would be easy to activate the altar and let it operate for thousands of years again. In that case, the real existence of the 3 Divine Kings' martial art avatars is not to suppress the terrifying crack behind the altar. They're just providing energy for the altar. However, why would the 3 Divine Kings of different eras do the same thing? Condensing such martial art avatars would consume a lot of the Divine King's energy. If it wasn't for something very important, they wouldn't have done this. Lu Feng smiled helplessly when he thought of this. I just understood the function of the 3 Divine Kings' martial art avatars. But now I've fallen into another mystery. When will this come to an end? With a deep sigh, Lu Feng once again warned himself not to think about it. Finally, Lu Feng looked at Taratus and said, Master Taratus, can I just go up to the altar directly? Taratus nodded his head gently. In a while, you will go to the top of the altar. I will sacrifice this divine item. When the time comes, a crack in space will appear at the top of the altar. On the other side of the crack is the realm of time, and that crack is the main entrance. You can walk into it directly and cultivate slowly. After 3 days, when the power of the divine item's transformation disappears, the crack will close again. However, when it opens before it closes, you can feel the change of time. When the time comes, remember to come out quickly. If you're not careful and get trapped inside, you will be crushed into nothingness by the time turbulence. Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded solemnly. Space turbulence was something that appeared when traveling through time and space. Ordinary space turbulence was enough to pose a threat to gods. On the other hand, the most terrifying spatial turbulence was enough to heavily injure or even kill those ancient King Realm experts. And the time turbulence was even more indescribably terrifying. It was extremely difficult to appear. Of course, once it appeared, it would be a catastrophe, a disaster. In the time turbulence, even the peerless divine king, the supreme of the universe, could not be safe. Even if they were not killed by the time turbulence, they would be completely lost in the time turbulence and eventually disappear without leaving a trace. It could be said that the time turbulence was definitely a disaster in the universe that even the divine king was afraid of. I understand, Grandmaster Taratus. If I feel the change, I will come out immediately. I will not stay. Taratus nodded his head gently. He was afraid that Lu Feng would be too immersed in it and not leave before it closed. Okay, you can go up now. I will wait for you here for 3 days. Lu Feng nodded gently. Looking at the incomparably tall peak of the altar, he took a deep breath and walked up directly. From the moment he took the first step, Lu Feng knew that this altar was completely different from the one on Gufang Star. Here, he did not feel any pressure of will, nor did he enter any illusion. Without hesitation, Lu Feng climbed directly to the top. Now, his identity was still Futu. If he moved too quickly, Taratus would definitely feel it. After all, Taratus was an almighty existence that was truly comparable to the virtual king. As long as he used even a little bit of martial power, Taratus would definitely be able to feel it easily. Therefore, by the time he climbed up the altar, 2 minutes had already passed. Seeing that Lu Feng had reached the top while panting, Taratus did not hesitate. He directly threw all 6 kinds of pinnacle grade 8 god objects at the altar. However, when these divine objects got close to the altar, a strange scene occurred. At the bottom of the altar, countless ancient veins appeared. These veins all emitted a bright brilliance. As soon as the brilliance appeared, it directly enveloped the 6 pinnacle grade 8 god objects. In just a moment, the 6 pinnacle grade 8 god objects completely disappeared. They completely turned into power and poured into the veins. As if they had received enough power, the veins became brighter and brighter. The veins were no longer limited to the bottom. Countless veins appeared one after another and climbed up the altar along the void. In the blink of an eye, the entire altar had become a resplendent world where countless light veins intertwined. Looking at the strange scene beneath his feet, Lu Feng was slightly stunned. Such a scene was very beautiful. However, the price to pay for this beauty was far too great. In the next moment, the countless light veins became extremely bright. After they covered the entire altar, they started to gather in the center of the altar. Not long after, the gathered light reached an extreme level. They finally broke away from the altar's restrictions and condensed into independent veins in the void. When these veins were completely formed, they turned into a huge door. In the blink of an eye, when the veins were completely formed, the huge door opened. Chapter 4:24. Foot to go in. Remember, don't get too immersed in it. Come out immediately when the time is up." Taradis's voice rang in Lu Feng's ears. He nodded lightly and didn't say anything. Although Taradis was below the altar, he nodded his head from above the altar. However, Lu Feng believed that Taradis could definitely see his movements. With one step, he stepped into the gate. Is this the realm of time? Looking at the empty world in front of him, Lu Feng was slightly speechless. During his time at the Federal University, he had seen countless godly objects and cities. Although the world seemed to be in a primitive era, it still had the feeling of a world. However, Lu Feng really couldn't see anything here. Everything he saw was empty. Everything around him was completely empty. After looking around a few more times, Lu Feng finally didn't waste any more time. He could stay here for 3 days, and the acceleration of the realm of time was 200 times. In other words, Lu Feng could stay here for 600 days. Although it seemed a lot, Lu Feng knew that if he was really recognized by the soul of the Alchemy Sutra, 600 days might not be enough to cultivate all 5 Alchemy Sutras. Therefore, he couldn't waste any more time. Looking at the 6 crystals in his hand, Lu Feng didn't cultivate directly. He had an inexplicable smile on his face. Here, it's another 600 days. I really don't know how to calculate my current age. After these days, Lu Feng was now 18 years old. However, he cultivated in the realm of time for 1,200 days. In this way, he was almost 22 years old. At the end of the 600 days, he would be almost 24 years old. Lu Feng was really at a loss. Was he 18 years old or 24 years old? After a while, he shook his head gently with a slight smile. Actually, I'm still 18. After all, time is accelerated in the realm of time. Apart from me, all the other freaks seem to have experienced time acceleration. Since that's the case, then I'll do the same. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng picked up a piece of crystal and began to look at the Pill Sutra inside. Cryptic and difficult to understand. This was Lu Feng's first impression after reading the Pill Sutra. It doesn't make sense at all. This was Lu Feng's second impression after reading the Pill Sutra. At this moment, looking at the crystal in front of him, Lu Feng finally understood the words of these masters. It was different from when he first learned the alchemy mantra. At that time, he felt that the alchemy mantra was very complicated, but he didn't feel like he couldn't even begin to understand it. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood how important it was for the soul of the pill mantra to acknowledge him. Although Lu Feng was stubborn to the point of paranoia and madness most of the time, he was always regarded as a lunatic without reason by others. However, Lu Feng understood himself. Perhaps he would go crazy when fighting, but most of the time, he still liked to use his brain to think about everything and understand everything. He was just used to using his fists to solve problems after coming up with a solution. Lu Feng was just like that. Most of the time, Lu Feng was a truly wise person. Therefore, at this moment, when relying on his fists couldn't solve anything, Lu Feng chose to use his wisdom to solve everything. Quietly looking at the crystal in his hand, Lu Feng pondered. He knew that if he wanted to get the soul of the pill mantra to acknowledge him, there would definitely be a way. Although Lu Feng wasn't an arrogant person, after experiencing all this, Lu Feng understood that he was incomparably noble and his aptitude was even more heaven-defying. Although he wasn't a match for the immortal king yet, one day in the future, he would stand above everything and become a supreme existence, whether it was the immortal king or the devil king. Therefore, if the immortal king could obtain the recognition of 2 souls of the pill mantra with just a little effort, then he would definitely be able to do it too. The only difference was that he hadn't found a way yet. Just like that, facing the crystal placed in the pill mantra, Lu Feng thought about it for an entire day. Back then, Lu Feng knew about the existence of the soul of the pill mantra. When he saw that the immortal king had comprehended 2 pill mantras, he was also extremely surprised. Lu Feng knew that the immortal king must have a way to obtain the recognition of the soul of the pill mantra. However, Lu Feng couldn't get it from there. Even if the immortal king was willing to tell him, Lu Feng wouldn't ask for it, because Lu Feng understood that this was a confrontation between him and the immortal king. It was a different kind of confrontation in a strange domain. No matter what, this time, I must comprehend the second part of the pill mantra, or even the third and fourth part, until I comprehend all of the pill mantra. As an emperor, how could Lu Feng allow an existence that he couldn't control? No. Therefore, Lu Feng once again focused all of his attention on the comprehension of the pill mantra. Just like that, another 3 days passed. However, in these 3 days, Lu Feng didn't make the slightest progress. Everything that he couldn't understand before was still the same. He still couldn't understand anything, not even the slightest bit. However, Lu Feng didn't show any irritation. After experiencing so much, he was no longer the impulsive youth Lu Feng from before. After pondering for a moment, Lu Feng began to think. If I want to comprehend the pill mantra, I must obtain the recognition of the soul of the pill mantra. I can be considered to have completely understood the meaning behind this. Long ago, Wang Yi had told Lu Feng that if he wanted to comprehend the pill mantra, he must obtain the recognition of the pill mantra. However, at that time, Lu Feng didn't think much of it. He had Shen Yuan, an abnormal talent. If he was given time to forcefully comprehend it, he should be able to do it. However, now that he really came into contact with the pill mantra, Lu Feng finally understood the validity of Wang Gui's words. He knew that if he wanted to comprehend the pill mantra, he must obtain the recognition of the soul of the pill mantra. However, how could he obtain recognition? Lu Feng was also puzzled. He had never experienced such things before. The soul of the pill mantra seems to be an existence of a will. After all, if the pill mantra really had a soul, then how could it be copied? Therefore, the soul of the pill mantra should be a kind of will of the pill mantra. It belongs to the era of elixirs and artifacts, the imprint of the supreme existence. If I want to obtain the recognition of the soul of the pill mantra, I'm afraid I have to obtain the will of those powerhouses. However, how can I do it? Gradually, Lu Feng sank into deep thought, and this time a whole 5 days passed in an instant. Finally, on the 5th day, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of something. In his eyes, there was a light that had never been seen before after he had entered the cave. Yes, the soul of the pill mantra, the soul of the pill mantra. Since this will is said to be a soul, then I have to use the soul to analyze it, comprehend it, and obtain its recognition. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood. Looking at the crystal in his hand, Lu Feng once again memorized all the contents. Although he still couldn't understand it, if he wanted to forcefully memorize it, there wouldn't be any problem. After memorizing all the contents by rote, Lu Feng immediately closed his eyes. In the next moment, Lu Feng reappeared in the vast and boundless divine plane of the sea of consciousness that was surging with primitive immortal force. Lu Feng, who was in his soul form, sat quietly between heaven and earth. His eyes suddenly opened, an endless divine light circulated. At this moment, the entire divine plane sea of consciousness began to riot. Huge waves appeared once again, as if they could destroy an era. This was a shocking phenomenon that would only appear when Lu Feng was thinking intensely. This time, Lu Feng directly recalled all the obscure chapters of the pill mantra that had been recorded in his mind. Time passed slowly. If this had been in the past, Lu Feng would have woken up a long time ago. This was because he couldn't continue comprehending at this point in time. However, this time, Lu Feng's soul form only frowned slightly, but he still had no intention of stopping. His eyes were still open, and boundless divine light was still circulating within them. However, no spirituality could be seen in Lu Feng's eyes. This meant that although Lu Feng's eyes were open, they couldn't see anything. This was because he was in the middle of a deep comprehension. As Lu Feng's time continued, traces of strange intent started to appear around him. They appeared on Lu Feng's body and gradually became denser. In the end, they actually transformed into countless grand visions. Lu Feng couldn't see anything because he had already completely sunk into the deepest depths of comprehension. The countless grand visions evolved one after another. They were incomparably shocking, heaven-defying, and terrifying. In the end, countless ancient existences appeared. However, these existences weren't the same. Some of the characters were clearly visible. However, most of them were extremely blurry. Within the strange phenomena, these clear existences looked at the outside world with an expression of endless mockery. They didn't seem to be strange phenomena at all. Their mocking expressions were completely directed at Lu Feng. At the moment, Lu Feng's comprehension had reached the most crucial part. Lu Feng had a feeling that as long as he broke through this final layer, he would be able to obtain the recognition of the Alchemy Sutra's soul and truly comprehend it. His face was extremely distorted, as if he was in extreme discomfort. This wasn't because Lu Feng was experiencing some sort of painful torture. Instead, Lu Feng was currently at the edge of comprehension. He felt as if he was about to enter, yet he couldn't. The visions outside didn't change. The final image had already been fixed. All of them were visions of those terrifying existences. The blurry images among them had completely disappeared. What remained were the images that had been incomparably clear before. These existences were still looking at Lu Feng mockingly, as if they were born with such expressions. Lu Feng was constantly on the edge of distortion. This feeling of not being able to enter despite seeing the door made Lu Feng feel a slight urge to go crazy. However, Lu Feng didn't give up. He was still crazily trying to break through. Finally, when the final moment arrived, Lu Feng's soul body actually let out an unresigned roar. At this moment, the prayers of countless gods, immortals, and demons appeared behind Lu Feng. Laws entwined around him. Karma and fate intertwined endlessly. All the greatest visions appeared at this moment. This was Lu Feng's vision. It was the strongest and most terrifying vision since ancient times. The great emperor's incarnation. At this most crucial moment, Lu Feng actually unconsciously used his strongest power, the great emperor's incarnation. The moment the great emperor's incarnation appeared, the entire spiritual sea's divine plane seemed to sense something. A terrifying upheaval began. Terrifying waves engulfed heaven and earth, time, and endless dusk. It seemed to want to engulf all existences. However, these huge waves appeared strangely quiet beside the great emperor's incarnation. There was a complete stillness. It was as if the surroundings of the great emperor's incarnation were the most terrifying and absolute forbidden zone. At this moment, the great emperor's incarnation quietly bloomed behind Lu Feng. At the same time, the expressions of those visions that seemed to be mocking him slowly changed, from mockery to indifference and finally to reverence and worship. Chapter 425. If Lu Feng was still in the midst of comprehension, he would definitely be shocked by this scene. This was because he had never seen such a scene before. When all these strange phenomena submitted humbly and trembled completely, their bodies started to dissipate and turn into nothingness. Finally, in the next moment, these strange phenomena also slowly disappeared. Lu Feng's face was no longer distorted like before. Instead, a hint of pleasant surprise appeared on his face. It was an unconcealable look of excitement and surprise. Gradually, the pleasant surprise on his face started to fade. It was replaced by an incomparably dull color. After an unknown amount of time, Lu Feng's spiritual body, which was above the spiritual sea's divine plane, disappeared instantly. In reality, Lu Feng, who was in the realm of time, suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with disbelief and excitement. I actually succeeded, Lu Feng muttered to himself. According to his original plan, even if his guess was correct, it would still take a lot of time to succeed. However, he had never expected that he would actually succeed this time. The process was so strange that Lu Feng couldn't believe it. He had only felt a wave of irritation at the edge of the area. In the end, when he had made up his mind to force his way through, he had discovered that all the seals had mysteriously disappeared just like that. All these changes made Lu Feng feel at a loss and puzzled. However, when Lu Feng went to read the pill mantra, he found that it was difficult to understand, and all the confusion he had before had disappeared. At this moment, the alchemy sutra that appeared in Lu Feng's mind was so clear that Lu Feng actually understood the meaning behind it very easily. This feeling of comprehension was even clearer and more thorough than when Lu Feng had comprehended the first part of the alchemy sutra. What is going on here? Lu Feng still remembered that comprehending the second part of the alchemy sutra would be more difficult than comprehending the first part, even if he had obtained the recognition of the soul of the alchemy sutra. However, what he had just experienced had overturned his understanding. After remaining silent for a long time, Lu Feng still couldn't figure out the reason. After smiling helplessly, he began to calculate the time he had spent. He did some calculations. Lu Feng already understood. Including the useless work he had done a few days ago, it had only been about 60 days. In other words, after 60 days, Lu Feng had successfully comprehended the second part of the pill scripture. Now that I've comprehended the second part of the pill mantra, all that's left is to continue to deepen my understanding of the contents. Then, when I use it, I'll be able to fully display it. Now, he was only comprehending and had not deeply explored these things, so Lu Feng was almost unable to do anything. There's a total of 600 days, and a tenth of it has already passed. As for the rest of the things, they would not have any effect if they just relied on continuous practice. Rather than wasting time, why don't we wait until we get out and verify our thoughts through alchemy? Once comprehended, even if he continued to practice, the effect would not be very obvious. After all, if he were to practice alchemy, the effect would be much, much better than simply comprehending. Lu Feng deeply understood this point. Therefore, after comprehending, he did not waste any time and persisted in doing something. If every part is like this, then I'm afraid I'll only need half the time, or even less, to completely comprehend all 5 parts of the pill scripture. When I get out, I'll use some time to practice, then the effect will be perfect. 600 days. Although he could not cultivate here, it was still 600 days. For the current Lu Feng, time was incomparably precious. Therefore, although he could not cultivate, he could not waste the remaining time. Thinking of this, Lu Feng took out the second crystal and began to comprehend the third part of the pill scripture. Just as Lu Feng thought, if he did not enter his sea of consciousness, then the effect would be really bad and he would not be able to comprehend anything. However, once he entered the sea of consciousness, his cultivation speed would reach a terrifying level. Moreover, Lu Feng found that as long as he entered the sea of consciousness, he could obtain the recognition of the soul of the pill scripture in a very short time and completely comprehend the content in a short time. As for what Wangui and Taradas said, after comprehending the first part, the difficulty of comprehending the second part increased a lot. Lu Feng really did not encounter this. Moreover, Lu Feng felt that the pill scripture seemed to be connected. Once the number of comprehensions increased, it would definitely be extraordinarily beneficial for the next comprehension. And this time was like that. He only spent 45 days to complete the third part of the pill scripture. One had to know that these 45 days were completely used to comprehend and comprehend. Previously, when he was in the second part, he actually spent about 50 days. And this time, it was brought forward by 5 days again. Such a change made Lu Feng feel excited. He had a perverted sea of consciousness, divine origin, and a terrifying soul. These days of comprehension did not make him feel any fatigue at all. Therefore, Lu Feng planned to comprehend the entire pill scripture in one go. When he thought of it, he naturally did it. Very quickly, Lu Feng began to comprehend the fourth part of the pill scripture. And this fourth part also did not disappoint him. This time, in less than 40 days, Lu Feng had actually managed to completely comprehend it. 150 days had passed since then. This was already equivalent to a quarter of 600 days. However, in this quarter of time, Lu Feng had already comprehended 3 out of the 5 parts of the pill scripture. This speed made Lu Feng simply incomparably excited. He knew that this time, he could really save a lot of time to carry out other cultivation. He did not continue to think. Once again, Lu Feng entered a state of cultivation. And this time, the speed was so fast that it was shocking. 50 days, a short period of 50 days. Lu Feng had actually completed the complete cultivation. He actually comprehended all 5 parts of the pill scripture. Standing in the empty area, Lu Feng's expression was extremely complicated and strange. To be able to comprehend all of them in less than a year in 200 days, this was undoubtedly exciting. But at the same time, this also made Lu Feng feel strange. The reason for that was because their speed was simply too fast. After hesitating for a moment, Lu Feng still took out the 5 parts of the pill scripture and comprehended all of the contents again. When he finished this time, he finally felt relieved. Lu Feng knew that this kind of comprehension was not an illusion. He really comprehended it. Since this is the case, then I really have to make good use of the remaining time. He had already made a decision in his heart. There were still 400 days left. If these 400 days had been in the universe, then Lu Feng would have been able to enter a terrifying level through countless collisions. However, in this space where cultivation was not allowed, there was nothing he could do. In this space, most people could only continue to comprehend. However, Lu Feng was different. This was because he had a cultivation technique that relied completely on the accumulation of time. He did not need the help of any law power. The origin scripture. I have already reached the soul integration realm of the second part of the origin scripture. I have also reached the peak of the great telekinesis grandmaster realm. I can already proceed to the 3rd stage of learning. The first 2 levels of the primordial sutra basically required Lu Feng to comprehend them before he could increase his realm. The so-called accumulation of mind power was not that important to Lu Fenglai. After all, the origin scripture he cultivated was a truly supreme cultivation technique with a terrifying power. As long as power existed, he could rely on external forces to accumulate his mind power to the highest level. Therefore, what Lu Feng needed to do was to comprehend the primordial sutra. He needed to comprehend everything that he needed to comprehend in this realm. He needed to rely on time to raise the realm that he needed to cultivate. When the time came, Lu Feng would only need to use those elixirs to raise his realm in a very short time. There was a look of excitement in his eyes. Lu Feng already understood that the origin scripture's effect on him was not just a little bit of improvement. That strange power was not the legendary primitive immortal power. This was the foundation of the 3 great immortal powers. It was the most terrifying and extreme power in everything. The strange power he had encountered previously was nothing. However, after reaching the great completion realm of the origin scripture, it was already extremely terrifying. It was almost an existence that belonged to the quasi-supreme power. After reaching the great completion realm of the origin scripture, the primitive immortal power became a true supreme power. Lu Feng understood that if he waited for the great completion realm of the origin scripture to reach the great completion realm of the origin scripture, the primitive immortal power would evolve again and enter a whole new level. At that time, it might not reach the terrifying level of 3 supreme powers that the immortal king had mentioned. However, it was still possible to surpass the height of 1 supreme power. Therefore, the origin scripture was no longer a cultivation technique that Lu Feng could use to supplement it. Its terrifying power would be truly accepted by Lu Feng. The immortal techniques I use are all extremely terrifying. They are several realms stronger than the telekinesis techniques used by ordinary existences. I think the reason for all this is because of the primitive immortal power. Once my primitive immortal power is further improved, the supreme immortal techniques I use will be even more terrifying. Lu Feng was only a telekinesis grandmaster, but the Qingming Tian he used was already equivalent to the full power of a beginner-perfect stage warrior. Furthermore, the Qingming Tian was a sky. This was an all-around attack. In every inch of space and time, the power was equivalent to the full power of a beginner perfect stage martial artist. There is no doubt that this was extremely terrifying. Previously, Lu Feng had roughly calculated according to the introduction. The power of the Qingming Tian should be equivalent to the power of an advanced or peak upheaval stage warrior. However, the power he used previously was at the peak of a beginner perfect stage warrior. The reason for this was the existence of the primitive immortal power. Now that he was able to further comprehend the primitive immortal power, the Qingming Tian and other supreme immortal techniques he used with the primitive immortal power would most likely be improved by a lot. If I can truly comprehend the primordial immortal spirit to the level that the immortal king mentioned, which is equivalent to 3 supreme immortal techniques, I'm afraid that the green firmament I use will be enough to easily annihilate all of the high-level perfect stage cultivators in the world. If I continue to use it, even a peak perfect stage warrior won't be able to withstand it and will be killed by me. Lu Feng finally understood the terror of a telekinesis master. Of course, it was the terror of a telekinesis master who possessed the primitive immortal power. Lu Feng could also kill a peak perfect stage warrior at the level of a telekinesis grandmaster. However, if he wanted to do so, he had to activate all 4 supreme powers. His body had to reach the limit. He had to enter the most glorious moment and use the peak power to do so. However, just by evolving the primitive immortal power to the highest level, he could almost challenge a level 8 martial artist. This was, without a doubt, shocking to the point of being unimaginable. Chapter 426. The Immortal King is also wrong. Perhaps the primitive immortal power is equivalent to the 3 supreme powers, but its effect is definitely not something the 3 supreme powers can compare to. Lu Feng had 4 supreme powers, and they were all at the pinnacle of supreme powers. He was only able to do this under extreme circumstances, and the primitive immortal power was only one type. With the support of supreme immortal techniques, it could be easily achieved. In this way, the primitive immortal power was almost equivalent to 4 types of primitive immortal power. My future is destined to reach the peak of supreme power. This is something that no existence can change. Just in terms of the path of martial arts, Lu Feng was about to reach an unparalleled level in this world. The only thing that could be compared to him was an immortal king and an unknown demon king. And Lu Feng believed that when he continued to cultivate, whether it was the immortal king or the demon king, they would all become steps on his path to becoming an emperor. Now, with the invincible primitive immortal force and those extremely terrifying supreme immortal techniques, even he was not sure how terrifying his limits would be in the future. Sitting down, Lu Feng was not in a hurry to cultivate. He began to slowly comb through all the experiences during this period. During this period, the most memorable thing for Lu Feng was the battle with the Heavenly King. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao, Wang Qingyun, was undoubtedly the strongest opponent Lu Feng had encountered so far. Of course, if the Immortal King were to make a move, it might be even more terrifying. However, among the existences that Lu Feng had truly fought, the strongest was the Heavenly King. That battle, although it did not allow him to break the barrier and enter the 3rd realm of the Great Devil True Body, the Purple Gold Great Devil Realm, it allowed him to reach the peak of the Golden Great Devil Realm. It allowed him to completely reach the peak state, with the possibility of advancing at any time. Therefore, that battle was a great gain for Lu Fenglai. Of course, what excited Lu Feng the most was the meaning of that battle. The Battle of the Kings. That was the beginning of the Battle of the Kings. The beginning of the Battle of the Kings also meant that all the monstrous geniuses in the universe could no longer hide. Whether they were willing or not, they had to participate in the Grand Era. They had to do their best to fight against all the monsters and geniuses. If he didn't fight, it meant failure and elimination. And such a chaotic world was exactly what Lu Feng needed. His great devil true body was all about endless tribulations, about the edge of life and death, about the abyss of depravity. Only an opponent like Wang Zhan, an extreme Dao freak, will be able to force Lu Feng to abandon everything and fight a world-shaking battle. Therefore, the start of the Battle of the Kings made Lu Feng completely excited. It gave him the possibility of transforming in a very short period of time, giving him the possibility of catching up to those monstrous geniuses in front of him. After taking a deep breath, Lu Feng's spirit finally calmed down. He knew that it was still too early to be excited. In the present age, he was no longer the strongest among his peers. Previously, he was still invincible among his peers. But now, a heaven-defying existence like the immortal king had appeared, and there was even an even more terrifying existence like the titled Demon King. They were all existences that he could not contend against for the time being. And among his peers, he was not invincible. When he looked at the younger generation, he was suppressed everywhere. Those people had started much earlier than him. Their strength was much stronger than Lu Fenglai's. If he really relied on his own strength to fight, then Lu Feng would be completely suppressed in an instant. Even if he encountered those existences at the peak of the perfect stage, not to mention monstrous geniuses, even the most ordinary of geniuses who could challenge those one level higher, Lu Feng would not have the slightest ability to resist. Therefore, Lu Feng already understood what he was lacking now. What I lack is true strength. My potential, my willpower. I am not afraid of anyone in the present age, and I am not inferior to anyone. But my strength is still too weak. If I don't have absolute strength, then even if I have talent, it will be useless. This time, Lu Feng thought of the previous battle with the Heavenly King. Facing the Heavenly King who had become an initial stage warrior, Lu Feng was still able to fight until the end. But when the Heavenly King regained his original strength, Lu Feng no longer had the slightest possibility of resisting. In an instant, he was completely suppressed. This was the difference in absolute strength. And what he lacked now was absolute strength. So, I have to work hard now. I have to work hard to raise my level as well. Thinking of this, Lu Feng did not hesitate and directly entered into cultivation. In the sky above the sea of consciousness, Lu Feng's soul body sat cross-legged quietly. The current Lu Feng had already developed another habit. That was, when he was thinking about profound problems, he would enter the sea of consciousness's divine plane. Because in this place, his comprehension and thinking ability would be strengthened several times. The current me has already reached the peak of the second stage of the Origin Sutra, the harmonious spirit realm. If I want to advance, cultivate, and let my primitive immortal power evolve further, I will have to continue comprehending the contents of the third stage of the Origin Sutra. The third stage is called the Divine Transformation Realm. But what is the Divine Transformation Realm? Lu Feng was no longer the ignorant psychic master idiot he had been before. He had experienced so much and had received personal guidance from Dao Song Tian. It could be said that Lu Feng's knowledge of psychic masters was extremely rich. The first and second stages of the Origin Sutra are the Nurturing Spirit Realm and the Harmonious Spirit Realm, respectively. Of these two major realms, the Harmonious Spirit refers to the primordial spirit, which is also my soul. This point had already been confirmed. Furthermore, the contents of these two major realms and the names are completely consistent. In other words, the name of this realm actually represents the direction and the true meaning of this cultivation. The Nurturing Spirit Realm nourished the soul and formed the vast divine plane. The Harmonious Spirit Realm fused the divine plane and the primordial spirit, which was also the soul, into one. This allowed the soul to completely utilize all the power in the divine plane and the spiritual sea, allowing the output of one's power to reach a terrifying level. Actually, although the Origin Sutra is an extremely powerful technique from the primordial immortal devil era, its cultivation and division seem to have many similarities with psychic masters. However, the Origin Sutra is obviously much more powerful. It can always be the first to produce everything. The Nurturing Spirit Realm fused the soul, Lu Feng thought. This realm could only be achieved by a psychic master. The harmonious spirit realm allowed one to utilize their mind power without limit. This was something that only a psychic master could truly set foot in. However, in the Primordial Sutra, Lu Feng was able to do it 1 or 2 levels ahead of time. This was enough to show how terrifying the Origin Sutra was. Of course, it also showed that there was an inseparable relationship between the Origin Sutra and the Psychic Master level. At this thought, Lu Feng's eyes lit up slightly. Faintly, he seemed to have thought through a lot. Becoming a spirit realm definitely does not refer to the divine spirit realm. It should refer to the primordial spirit, which is my soul. This realm should be related to the spirit realm above the psychic master realm. Above the psychic master realm is the divine master realm. Among the divine masters, the realm related to the soul is, faintly, Lu Feng's expression showed a hint of shock. He looked a little hesitant, a little shocked, and a little incredulous. Lu Feng had already guessed it. However, Lu Feng found it hard to believe. Could this really be the case? If this is really the case, then this is really too terrifying. After hesitating for a while, Lu Feng thought carefully for a long time. However, he still felt that this was the only possibility. Therefore, Lu Feng gradually calmed down and gradually believed that this might be the truth. Legend has it that when a psychic master steps into the divine spirit realm, he is a divine master. The existence of a divine master is the power of enslaving the laws. Therefore, in the realm above the divine spirit realm, a psychic master is the real peak combat power. An ordinary god-tier master is equivalent to a true god. This meant that any existence above the god-tier master realm was equivalent to a 4th-stage Emperor Dao domain expert. They are existences that are enough to be crowned as emperors within the major races. In the realm of martial artists, among the psychic masters, spiritual psychic masters, and psychic masters are obviously not as terrifying. When they fought at the same level, they were weaker than martial artists by a level. However, in the realm above the divine spirit realm, they suddenly went from lagging behind to level 4 emperor realm. The reason for all this is not only because of the psychic master's divine power, but also because of the second soul. The second soul is the reason why psychic masters can all transform into level 4 emperor realm geniuses after becoming existences above the divine spirit realm. The second soul should be the second primordial spirit in the legends of the immortals. After all, the divine spirit mentioned in the primordial scripture refers to the soul. In that case, the third realm of the primordial scripture, the divine spirit realm, should be the formation of the second soul. Lu Feng's heart was in turmoil. The appearance of the second soul was definitely a sign of a crazy increase in combat power. Now, when he fought, martial artists were martial artists, and psychic masters were psychic masters. Although he could use the power of psychic master when fighting martial artists, in the end, the two great powers were released by him alone. It could be said that when he used the supreme immortal technique, he could not use any other techniques to fight martial artists. However, if he really had the second soul, everything would be different. A psychic's battle was a battle where the soul used the psychic power to construct a pattern array and draw in all the power to strengthen their psychic power and further increase their power. If a second soul was formed, everything could be completely controlled by the second soul. At that time, his main body would focus on fighting martial artists. His second soul would be in charge of using supreme immortal techniques to launch the most extreme attacks. When he thought of this, Lu Feng's mouth became slightly dry. Chapter 427. If I can really enter the third realm of the primordial scripture, I'm afraid my sea of consciousness divine origin will evolve once again. At that time, the primordial immortal power will also evolve, and the power of power will definitely be even more terrifying. Now that I've used the primordial immortal power to execute the supreme immortal technique, it's already equivalent to the power of a peak 5th order emperor path expert. Once my primordial immortal power evolves, it will definitely have the combat strength of a 6th Order Emperor Path expert. Moreover, a supreme immortal technique like the green firmament sky itself is already terrifying. Perhaps it can't completely resist a peak 7th Order Emperor Path expert, but such combat strength can't be underestimated. Using the second soul of the green firmament sky already belongs to a peak 6th Order Emperor Path expert. Lu Feng was slightly stunned by everything he thought of. He understood that once he really condensed a second primordial spirit, which was also a second soul, how terrifying would he be when fighting with me? In addition to accepting the extreme madness of a martial artist, you also have to endure the killing of a peak 6th Order Emperor Path expert, who can even contend with a 7th Order Emperor Path expert. Moreover, every output of the power of power will be at the extreme limit, the kind that's crazy and unstoppable. When the time comes, what will I be afraid of? I'm afraid that even in my current state, when facing an immortal king of the same level, I won't be unable to fight. Even at such a level, Lu Feng still didn't have the slightest confidence that he could defeat an immortal king. He understood that an immortal king who controlled 6 supreme powers still didn't have the strength to defeat him before he completely transformed. However, once he condensed the second soul, he would have the ability to fight with the two of them. Although there was still a great possibility of failure, it was much better than the current situation where he would definitely lose. Thinking of this, Lu Feng tried hard to calm the excitement in his heart. Slowly, he calmed down. At this moment, he finally understood the terror of the Primordial Sutra. This kind of power was indeed worthy of the reputation of the supreme technique of the immortal and devil era. After spending a day, Lu Feng recalled the cultivation method of the 3rd stage of the primordial scripture to the divine realm dozens of times. At this time, Lu Feng finally confirmed one thing. He was finally sure that his guess was correct. After hesitating for a moment, Lu Feng finally decided to immediately start condensing the second soul. It's not that easy to condense a second soul. Dao Song Tian, Sensei, never explained it to me. Therefore, I can only use the method described in the primordial scripture to condense it. Back then, Dao Song Tian didn't tell Lu Feng about the realm above Godmaster. After all, in the history of this era, no Psyche Master had ever become a Godmaster before 100 years old. Although he believed that Lu Feng was an invincible monster with the potential to become an eternal God Emperor, Dao Song Tian never believed that Lu Feng could start to come into contact with things that only God Masters and above could come into contact with before the age of 20. Fortunately, Lu Feng still had the Primordial Sutra, the Nurture God Realm, and the Amalgamation God Realm of the Primordial Scripture only belong to the initial stages of the Primordial Scripture. Starting from the God Realm, the cultivation of the Primordial Scripture can be considered to have entered the intermediate stage. The intermediate stage can also be considered to have started to be more detailed. Previously, the Nurture God Realm and the Amalgamation God Realm had only been recorded briefly. It could be said that if Lu Feng hadn't been smart enough, and if there hadn't been Psyche Masters to verify the information, Lu Feng might not have been able to cultivate the Nurture God Realm successfully. However, things were different now. Starting from the intermediate stage of the Primordial Scripture, there was already a more detailed introduction. This time, Lu Feng even saw the method to form the second soul. However, after looking at the cultivation method, Lu Feng hesitated. This was because the cultivation method to become a God Realm cultivator was simply too unbelievable. He didn't dare cultivate it. Is this reliable? The corners of Lu Feng's mouth curled into a helpless, bitter smile. He was a little worried as he looked at the cultivation method again. However, in the end, he still couldn't decide whether to continue cultivating. The cultivation method to become a God Realm cultivator recorded in the Primordial Scripture wasn't very complicated or difficult. It was just that this primitive foundation stage made some people not dare to cultivate it. This was because the method to form the second soul, which is also the method to form the original form of the second soul, required Lu Feng to split his own soul into two. Of all the things that Lu Feng knew, the soul, was the most important existence. It definitely couldn't be harmed in the slightest. However, the cultivation method to become a God realm cultivator first required him to split his own soul into two. This was a little unbelievable. Splitting into two parts? That's a little too inconceivable, isn't it? Most people would die in an instant if their soul was split. Even if they didn't die, their ending wouldn't be very good. Lu Feng was hesitating whether he should cultivate or not. He believed that Dao San Tian must have a more detailed cultivation method. Moreover, it shouldn't be as inconceivable as the cultivation method of the primordial scripture. However, if he wanted to contact Dao San Tian, Lu Feng would have to leave this place. These 400 days would be equivalent to a waste of time. In the past, a waste of time would have been a waste. However, things were different now. He had started the Battle of the Kings. As the person who started the battle and the first victor, Lu Feng would definitely be the target of everyone's challenge. Among them, there were many who were stronger than him. Therefore, Lu Feng couldn't waste any time at all. What he needed the most now was time. He needed an endless amount of time to cultivate and improve his cultivation. Therefore, Lu Feng couldn't give up these 400 days. Moreover, Lu Feng could vaguely sense that the cultivation method of the primordial scripture was unique. If he followed the cultivation method of a psyche master, he might be able to continue cultivating in the end, but the effect would be different. Faintly, Lu Feng seemed to recall the past. In the true abyss of massacre, Lu Feng had faced countless life and death situations at the last moment. That kind of situation could even corrode and destroy one's soul. At that time, my soul had already completely decayed. The only thing that remained was my persistence, and my will. If you want to talk about danger, this is just splitting my soul. It can't be compared to the past. Back then, Lu Feng's soul had been split apart. He had been annihilated to the very last bit. If it wasn't for the existence of a life realm tribulation, then even if he woke up, he would have been an idiot. Compared to the danger at that time, now that it was just a split soul, it didn't seem like much. No matter what, I can't waste this time. I've already survived such a dangerous situation. Now, this isn't a dangerous situation, so how can I retreat? So let's do it. There was a slightly ruthless look in his eyes. Lu Feng had already decided to do it. He took a deep breath and expelled all the negative emotions from his body. At this moment, Lu Feng once again entered a state of tranquility. He needed to let himself be completely calm. This was because Lu Feng knew that there was no room for failure in this process. If I fail, although I won't die, it's inevitable that I'll suffer great damage. At that time, let's not talk about my main body and second soul fighting the enemy together. I'm afraid that even my main body's strength will be greatly damaged. This time, there's no life realm tribulation. Although this time, I won't be able to recover to my original state by experiencing pain. Therefore, I must be careful. I must be cautious and cautious. As he said this to himself, Lu Feng completely expelled all the distracting thoughts in his heart. His heart once again entered a state of emptiness. This was an extremely dangerous moment, but the more it was, the more tranquil Lu Feng's heart was, and the more he entered a state of incomparable calmness that was terrifying. Finally, when he felt that his state had entered the most perfect moment, Lu Feng slowly moved. An extremely terrifying and peerless weapon appeared in the void. The weapon's appearance was like a sword, but it wasn't a sword. It looked like a saber, but it wasn't a saber either. It was extremely strange. Looking at the strange weapon in the void, Lu Feng's eyes showed a brief moment of confusion. He gently shook his head. Lu Feng didn't know why he would be so absent-minded at such a moment. However, since it was extremely brief, Lu Feng didn't think too much about it. Looking at this peerless weapon, Lu Feng took a deep breath. This was a peerless weapon that he had condensed using the cultivation method of the godly state and his own mental strength. Under normal circumstances, Lu Feng's mental strength would absolutely not be able to harm him. However, at this moment, he felt an invincible killing intent from this peerless weapon. In front of such an aura, He actually felt that he could be extinguished at any time. Without a doubt, this was frightening. Lu Feng knew that the reason for all of this should be the cultivation method of the godly state. Looking at the peerless weapon exuding an unparalleled majesty in the void, Lu Feng showed a mocking and helpless smile. To think that I, Emperor Lu Feng, whose suppressed existences of the same level, have to cut myself now. Thinking of this, Lu Feng could only let out a long sigh. If one wanted to split one's soul, the cultivation method of the godly state in the Origin Sutra was very simple. Now, while his soul was cultivating the secret technique, he had to use the peerless weapon to directly cut his own soul into two halves. This is really very direct and very simple. Using a knife to cut himself directly was extremely simple. There was no need for any mystery or complexity. It was just a matter of a moment. Since he had already decided, there was no possibility of backing down. Therefore, after sighing slightly, Lu Feng directly started the cultivation process of the secret technique. The cultivation of the secret technique was very simple. For an existence like Lu Feng, there was no difficulty at all. When Lu Feng was immersed in cultivation, his willpower seemed to gradually sink. Time passed by minute. In the void, the aura of the peerless weapon became more and more terrifying. It actually seemed like it was going to split the heavens and earth, causing people to tremble in fear. Finally, in the shortest time possible, the peerless weapon moved. Just like that, it charged towards Lu Feng in a frenzy. In an instant, the entire Shen Yuan's spiritual sea experienced the craziest rebellion. Monstrous waves that seemed capable of destroying everything between heaven and earth made people tremble in fear. The rebellion in Shen Yuan's spiritual sea was even more terrifying than the extreme madness Lu Feng had experienced when he was refining the elixir in the forbidden area. Chapter 428. At the time, Lu Feng had used it consciously. Although it was crazy, it was unable to reach the level of being completely unrestrained. Now that Lu Feng had completely lost his will, there was no bottom line to this madness. Countless huge waves surged towards Lu Feng. Strangely, these huge waves did not protect Lu Feng. They seemed to be completely invisible to the murderous weapon that was charging towards Lu Feng. They did not seem to have any intention of stopping it. In the end, they still completely destroyed Lu Feng's soul. Under normal circumstances, after a soul was destroyed, the entire soul would scatter. However, at this moment, an extremely strange scene appeared. The soul body Lu Feng was directly split into two from middle. However, these two halves did not show any signs of being annihilated. Countless rays of light appeared at the crack. When the light reached its limit, Shen Yuan's sea of consciousness, which was churning at its limit, finally reached its peak. This tumbling was the most complete riot in the spiritual sea. It was a crazy surge with no bottom line. If there was anything here, it would be completely smashed into pieces by these invincible waves and turned into nothingness. However, when these huge waves tumbled to their limit, the huge waves that were charging towards the clouds suddenly fell in the next moment. All of them, strangely and completely, became quiet. Countless light spots flickered, danced, and soared into the sky. They were produced from the violent waves. They were the original essence of the spiritual sea. This time, when the terrifying riot froze for an instant, they finally broke free from all restraints and completely entered the spiritual sea. The light spots flickered with an indescribable sense of beauty that made people subconsciously sink and lose themselves. These light spots did not disappear. After they danced, they all flew towards the terrified soul body that was split into two. The soul body Lu Feng had been split into two by the murderous weapon that he had condensed with his own absolute power. However, the two halves didn't disappear. Instead, they flickered with the same eye-catching light at the edge of the crack. Soon, these useless light spots began to land on the edges of the two halves of the crack. And as time passed, more and more of them gathered, becoming more and more eye-catching and extreme. After an unknown period of time, the light dots had already completely separated the two halves of the soul body. Gradually, half of the area that was covered began to become clear. In a trance, when the light gradually disappeared, the other half of the body became more and more obvious, more and more eye-catching. These specks of light seemed to be a special kind of restorative material. They actually started to slowly heal Lu Feng's split body. Previously, the left and right halves combined to form the complete Lu Feng. But at this moment, the two soul bodies gradually became a complete Lu Feng. There were actually two Lu Feng soul bodies on the scene. Ascension stage. This was the ascension stage. The second primordial spirit was formed, which was also the second soul. Lu Feng had really completed it. After an unknown period of time, perhaps an eternity, or perhaps an instant, Lu Feng's eyes gradually opened. It was a kind of ordinary gaze, but if one looked carefully, they would see a kind of endless vicissitudes of life, a kind of strange pair of eyes filled with endless karma and fate. However, this feeling didn't last for long. Soon, everything in the eyes began to disappear, completely extinguished. At this time, the eyes of the two Lu Feng were filled with the color of humanity again. Success! A voice came out from the mouths of the two Lu Feng at the same time. In an instant, the two figures looked at each other. Their actions were surprisingly identical, without the slightest feeling of difference. It was like the world inside and outside the mirror. After looking at each other for a long time, the two Lu Feng smiled. They both smiled faintly, smiled fiercely, and laughed crazily. I actually succeeded. I actually succeeded just like that. The second soul, Lu Feng, actually succeeded. One had to know that this was the main strength of a god-tier master that could be compared to a monstrous genius in the fourth stage Emperor realm. This was a supreme divine ability that only a god-tier master could truly condense. However, Lu Feng succeeded. Just like that, he really succeeded. He let out a deep breath. At this moment, Lu Feng had never been so relaxed and happy before. Although he had succeeded countless times in his life, this time, Lu Feng felt very happy. Lu Feng knew that the appearance of the second soul meant that Lu Feng's most terrifying transformation had begun. From now on, as long as the second soul was completely independent, then whether it was his cultivation or power during battle, Lu Feng would enter a new and terrifying extreme. At that time, he was truly terrifying, truly peerless, and unparalleled. Slowly, Lu Feng stood up. The other Lu Feng also stood up. Lu Feng quietly looked at the other Lu Feng, and the other Lu Feng also looked at him. Lu Feng knew that the other one was his second soul, although in essence, they each occupied half of the main body. However, Lu Feng knew that he was the main body. From now on, you are also Lu Feng. Lu Feng, who was sitting opposite him, nodded his head gently. You are the Emperor Lu Feng, the first soul. As for me, I am also Lu Feng, the Emperor. I am his second soul. The two of them were connected. They both knew the meaning of each other. At this moment, the two Lu Feng smiled again. Then from now on, you will first cultivate to the small success stage of the divine realm. Strive to succeed in cultivating in the shortest time possible. This way, we will have an additional layer of protection. The second soul nodded lightly. It actually sat cross-legged in the void and began cultivating in the endless divine plane of the sea of consciousness. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng really had the urge to throw his head back and laugh out loud. With the cultivation of the second soul, his cultivation speed was at least 50% faster than if he cultivated on his own. Although the effect didn't seem that obvious, when the base number became very large, it was abnormally terrifying. The small success stage requires the second soul to cultivate into a completely independent existence. According to the calculation above, it will take about 3,000 days to complete. Fortunately, I have the second soul, so it will take me 2,000 days. Moreover, the essence of the small success stage of the divine realm is to continuously absorb the essence of the primitive immortal power in the divine plane of the sea of consciousness and integrate it into the second soul, allowing it to truly grow to the same level as the main body. These 3,000 days are actually based on the normal divine plane. My divine plane is a mutated divine plane after being stimulated by my bloodline. It is at least 4 times larger than other divine planes of the same level. In other words, my cultivation speed can be increased by 4 times. If this is the case, I will need about 500 days to reach the small success stage of the divine realm. 500 days compared to 3,000 days really save a lot of time. I can stay in this divine realm for about 400 days. If this is the case, after I go out for 3 months, I will be able to reach the small success stage of the divine realm. At that time, I will truly step into the realm of a spiritual reader. My primitive immortal power will evolve again and become even more powerful, even surpassing a type of terrifying immortal power. At the same time, I will also be able to use the second primordial spirit in battle. After I become a spiritual reader, I will also have reached the realm of a spiritual reader. At that time, I will be able to start refining grade 5 elixirs and become a true alchemy master. Lu Feng was very confident. His comprehension ability was amazing, and with the help of the primitive immortal energy, he had already comprehended 6 parts of the pill scripture. It could be said that no one in the same level as him could compare to him on the path of alchemy. Once I become an alchemy master, I will be able to refine the elixirs that I need and allow my spiritual reader level to reach the peak of the spiritual reader level in a very short time. At that time, I will also be able to use these elixirs to exchange for a huge amount of wealth to help me on the path of martial arts. A grade 3 perfect grade elixir was limited to 1 million divine item points. A grade 4 perfect grade elixir was 100 million. As for a grade 5 perfect grade elixir, it was 10 billion. The path of elixir refining is really very profitable. Back then, I received news that a grade elixir was only worth a few billion to 10 billion Federation dollars. Now, it seems that the so-called price is not in Federation dollars, but in divine item points. The exchange rate between Federation dollars and divine item points was, according to the standard, 1 to 10,000. Therefore, the price of a grade 5 perfect grade elixir should be 100 trillion Federation dollars. Now that all the groundwork has been laid, I don't have any more pursuits in the spiritual reader aspect for the time being. What I need is the aspect of martial arts. If I can enter the upheaval stage, then with the abundant resources and wealth, I will definitely be able to find a suitable occasion to quickly raise my warrior level to the upheaval stage. I have a premonition that if I really raise my psyche master and warrior level to the peak of this stage, then at that time, even if I really face an immortal king, I will definitely have the strength to fight. The immortal king level was the upheaval stage, and Lu Feng was also at the upheaval stage at that time. An immortal king controlled at least 6 supreme powers. Lu Feng only had 4, which seemed to be at a disadvantage. However, Lu Feng's base conditions were too terrifying. His physical body was 7 times stronger, and his martial path incarnation was also at the peak of grade 6. In addition to other aspects, Lu Feng's overall conditions were much stronger than that of an immortal king who was only a spiritual reader. At that time, with the second soul, this is almost equivalent to the peak of grade 6 king path. If the immortal king really only has 6 supreme powers, I might have a chance to fight against him. Chapter 429. In his eyes, there was a burning flame of battle intent. Although Lu Feng had defeated the immortal king in the previous alchemy competition, but everyone understood that the path of alchemy was nothing at all. Whether it was the immortal king or Lu Feng, in their eyes, the path of alchemy was really a relatively irrelevant field. Therefore, defeating the immortal king in the field of alchemy was actually not much to be proud of. It was also because of this reason that the immortal king did not have the slightest bit of frustration when facing Lu Feng. When he faced Lu Feng, he was still the most terrifying, extreme, monstrous immortal king since ancient times. And such an immortal king was obviously someone that Lu Feng could not go against. To Lu Feng, such an immortal king was always a mountain. If he could not fight, if he could not win, then he would never be able to reach the supreme peak. An immortal king, a demon king. And according to the immortal king, there seemed to be many monstrous geniuses of this era hiding. Therefore, I must have a most extreme power in order to truly reach the most terrifying extreme peak. Lu Feng knew that he did not have the qualifications to covet the strongest right now. Therefore, he had to work even harder. He fell silent slightly. The second soul was still in the midst of cultivation. This time, Lu Feng calmed down. He began to think about whether he still lacked anything at present. Previously, he was mainly thinking about the psychic aspect. At this time, Lu Feng was thinking about his martial arts aspect. Previously, the psychic and martial arts cultivators cultivated at the same time, which indeed wasted too much time. But at the same time, the benefits obtained were also terrifying. Now, with this second soul, I can finally relax and focus on improving my martial arts. Now, my martial arts realm has already risen to the realm, which is already the limit. If I still want to improve, then I will waste too much time. It is not worth it at all. And my cultivation method, through the tempering of these years, has already reached the peak of 9 times. In this aspect, I don't need any improvement. On the path of the fleshly body, it can be said that I have become an extreme existence. Even the peak bloodlines of those epic overlords are not as terrifying as my fleshly body. As for the martial avatar, before I break through to the next level, I'm afraid that it will be impossible for me to improve. Lu Feng was pondering over this matter. In this way, in terms of martial arts, I have almost reached the limit of a martial artist in the evolution stage. As for the Psyche Masters, you don't have to worry about them either. Since that's the case, I'll use the remaining time to improve my combat strength. There was no need to waste any more time on martial arts and psychic skills. Therefore, Lu Feng had decided to use the remaining time to increase his combat strength. Actually, apart from the cultivation of martial arts and Psyche Masters, the greatest help in improving one's combat strength is the cultivation of the supreme power. It is said that in order to comprehend the third supreme power, and in order to evolve his bloodline power to the supreme power level, the Heavenly King has already gone to the endless abyss to undergo the most painful tempering. When he returns, I reckon that he will at least be a terrifying freak with 4 supreme powers. As for the immortal king, he has comprehended at least 6 supreme powers. Although my monarch power, great demon power, and primitive immortal power still have deeper potential to be unearthed, due to the limitations of my realm, there is nothing I can do. Since that's the case, I might as well focus on comprehending more supreme powers. Since he couldn't do anything about quality, he could only do it through quantity. If people who didn't know Lu Feng heard Lu Feng say this, they would probably laugh their heads off. Supreme powers were something that measured the level of a freak. Before becoming a god, the more supreme powers one accumulated, the more terrifying the transformation would be after becoming a god, and the more extreme one's future potential would be. It could be said that as long as one could comprehend 2 supreme powers before becoming a god, they would become a freak at the peak of the 7th stage of the monarch realm. This also meant that they would definitely become a god. A freak at the peak of the 7th stage of the monarch realm would definitely be able to become a divine king, a true supreme existence. It was just that there were too few people who could reach this step, almost none. After all, there were only a few divine king supreme beings in an era, and even a peak of the 7th stage of the monarch realm basically only comprehended 2 supreme powers. Of course, this was referring to normal eras. In normal eras, the situation was like this. However, there were also exceptions. This was the legendary War of the Monarchs. War of the Monarchs could give birth to peak of the 7th stage of the monarch realm. This was universally acknowledged and irrefutable. Moreover, those monstrous geniuses who were already at the peak of the seventh stage of the monarch Dao domain were able to comprehend even more powerful supreme powers through the collisions of the monarch Dao domains. They were able to comprehend even more supreme powers. It could be said that the War of the Monarchs was the era that allowed countless freaks to truly transform. The era of the War of the Monarchs was the true era of invincibility. In the previous historical records, it was said that the era of the War of the Monarchs was an era where freaks were born in large numbers. Supreme powers are a power that only the virtual king can come into contact with and gradually control. Furthermore, the virtual king who can control supreme powers is undoubtedly a heaven-defying existence. However, in the era of the War of the Monarchs, freaks who can control more than two supreme powers have repeatedly appeared. This is the terror of the War of the Monarchs. Lu Feng sighed. After a long time, he finally calmed down slowly. The current already had a new goal. For Lu Fenglai, comprehending a new supreme power was already the most important thing at the moment. Only when one comprehends a supreme power before becoming a god can it have the best effect. If there are conditions, of course, the more supreme powers one can comprehend, the better. This was one way of saying it, although he didn't know the reason behind it. However, this saying was universally acknowledged. Therefore, Lu Feng naturally believed it. Now, if he wanted to increase his combat strength, he could only find a way in the aspect of supreme powers. And the best way was to comprehend even more supreme powers. There was no doubt that his body possessed the embryonic form of supreme powers, the power of life and death. Legend has it that only the life and death quasi-monarchs with invincible titles can comprehend and borrow supreme powers. Only the more terrifying freaks like the life and death quasi-monarchs might be able to comprehend them. The power of life and the power of death are both existences that involve the laws of life and death. They are truly the pinnacle of supreme powers. In that case, comprehending them will be of unimaginable help to my battle prowess. The corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile. Lu Feng knew that if he comprehended these two supreme powers, his future path would be smoother. There are less than 400 days left. I wonder if this time is enough. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng sank into a state of comprehension. In 400 days, even for Lu Feng, who had shunned Yuan's sea of consciousness, he didn't have any confidence that he could comprehend even one of them. Of course, this didn't mean that he couldn't comprehend them. It was just that Lu Feng didn't know if he could comprehend them. After all, this was a supreme power that even the life and death quasi-monarchs might not be able to comprehend. Gradually, Lu Feng once again sank into a deep state of comprehension. 3 days. Lu Feng had been in the realm of time for 3 whole days. These 3 days were enough time for the news of what had happened in Medicine God City to spread to all corners of the universe. Now, an unprecedented bustle had appeared on the battlefield of the foreign regions. Countless freaks and geniuses had poured into this chaotic battlefield. Many races, families, and clans ancient almighties had revived. They had all shouldered the responsibility of protecting their bloodline descendants and had all descended on the battlefield of the foreign regions. In the past, the battlefield of the foreign regions had been incomparably chaotic. Now, after the arrival of many ancient and terrifying gods and even monarch realm existences, the chaos of the battlefield of the foreign regions had reached an extreme level. Wind God territory, Wind God City. Invincible majesty descended and crushed all existences in an instant. The entire void was turbulent and filled with countless intertwined cracks. Many venerables trembled in fear and prostrated themselves on the ground. Their expressions were unprecedentedly fearful. Many venerables had lived here for dozens or even hundreds of years. During this long period of time, they only knew that their Lord, the Wind God Lord, was an incomparably great existence. He was a peerless existence that enjoyed a great reputation on the battlefield of the foreign regions. However, how terrifying and powerful the Wind God Lord was something that the various races living here didn't know. In the battlefield of the foreign regions, there was no need to believe in anything. The only thing that could be trusted was strength. Strength was the most terrifying strength that made everyone tremble in fear. Now, they had finally seen it. They finally knew how heaven-defying strength was hidden behind this peerless reputation. Yao Guangming, do you really want to be enemies with our Netherworld clan? In the void, in the endless torn eras, an ancient and desolate voice suddenly came out. Just the transmission of the voice seemed to be able to affect billions of eras. Some gods who were prostrating and trembling were horrified. Living in the battlefield of the foreign regions, they naturally understood that only a virtual king could produce such an effect with just the sound of his voice. Moreover, only an ancient virtual king above the 5th level could do it. A virtual king at the 5th level of the Void Realm. How terrifyingly powerful. It should be known that although there were countless experts in the battlefield of the foreign regions, a God Realm expert was already considered a formidable character. In the eyes of a King Realm expert, a God Realm expert was undoubtedly an ant. In the eyes of a King Realm expert, a God Realm expert, and an ordinary warrior were existences that could be easily destroyed. There was not much difference between them. Among them, a King Realm expert at the 5th level of the Void Realm could be said to be an extreme existence. In a peak Overlord race, he could be said to be the true ultimate existence. However, now a Netherworld clan expert at the 5th level of the Void Realm had actually descended on the Wind God City and even started a dispute with the Lord of the Wind God territory. This caused everyone to be on tenterhooks. In the void, there was only a faint echo. After a long time, a voice finally rang out. Netherworld clan, do you really think that you are invincible in the universe? Hearing this, a figure finally walked out of the endless shattered starry sky in the void. That was an incomparably strange existence. From his body, many existences could feel an absolute ancient aura. However, his face gave people the illusion of youth and vitality. Of course, everyone knew that a person with such a shocking cultivation could not really be a young man. It was just that this peerless ancestor of the Netherworld clan had cultivated to an extreme level and had changed his appearance and bloodline. Chapter 430. The Underworld Race's patriarch frowned as he looked at the void. He raised his hand gently and looked at the trace of blood on it. His eyes were filled with fear. Earlier on, Yangming had come here to look for Lu Feng's traces, but he was attacked by extreme grade as soon as he released his mental power. If he hadn't had a genuine grade 8 artifact protecting him, the collision just now would have been enough to annihilate him completely. Even so, his grade 8 artifact had been completely shattered. Even the arm holding the artifact had suffered an unparalleled injury. There was no doubt that this had horrified him. Therefore, he had no choice but to use the Underworld Race's title. Unfortunately, the Wind God Overlord didn't seem to appreciate it. The Underworld Race's patriarch calmed down and didn't look around. He was silent for a moment before he finally said slowly, "The Underworld Race is nothing. However, we have the peerless divine king among us. I remember that the reason why you, Yao Guangming, could become the Lord of the Wind God territory and become a legendary figure in the foreign battlefield was because you once escaped from the hands of the Supreme God King, right?" Upon hearing this, many existences who were prostrating on the ground trembled for a long time. Their faces, which they didn't dare raise, were filled with horror. The Divine King was an absolute supreme existence, whether it was in the universe or in the Outland battlefield, where the strong were respected and chaos reigned supreme. For the Divine King, there was no one in the entire universe who couldn't be killed except for the Divine King himself. As long as the Divine King wanted to kill someone, no one could escape unless another Divine King made a move. But their city lord managed to escape with his life under the pursuit of a Divine King. How heaven-defying was this? What kind of strength was this? Yao Guangming, heavenly deity Jialan, was so stunning back then. He could even enter the forbidden domain of the physical body for a short time. He was a true grade 7 monstrous genius of the King Path domain. His greatness shocked the world, causing millions and millions of living beings to be deeply shocked. But so what? After he exited the Divine King's body and entered the forbidden domain, he was still hunted down and killed by the ancestors of my Netherkin. At that time, he was the real virtual king of level 8 barren territory. And as a virtual king of the 8th layer of the Desolate Realm, he is much, much stronger than many quasi-kings who have entered the final life realm. In the end, he still couldn't escape death. If you, Yao Guangming, hadn't relied on the help of others, how could you have escaped from the hands of the Divine King? You're still too weak compared to Jialan. You should know that if my ancestor, the Nether King, intervened, you won't have a second chance to become famous. The voice gradually faded away. The old ancestor of the Underworld clan stood quietly in the sky. He looked at the other side of the horizon, and finally, there was a flicker in his eyes. Because in the next moment, the sky cracked open and a ray of light pierced through the firmament. Looking at the distant horizon in disbelief, the old ancestor of the Underworld clan's eyes were filled with unwillingness, absolute unwillingness. After a long time, the old ancestor of the Underworld clan used up the last of his strength in this life, and finally spoke slowly. Why? On the other side of the sky, at the end of the ray of light, a voice slowly came out. It was so ethereal that it made people unable to describe the feeling within. Do you know? You've made 2 mistakes. The old ancestor of the Underworld clan had reached the end of his life. He didn't know why. As a 5th level virtual realm virtual king, he was completely destroyed by a ray of light. Even his soul was destroyed. Therefore, he was unwilling. He had to see the whole thing in the end. His eyes widened slightly, as if he was waiting for the final result. Finally, a voice came from the other side of the sky again. First of all, you know that I once escaped from the hands of a universe supreme. However, you should know that the person who saved me was a senior of the human clan, and his surname was Liu. His eyes, which were already huge, trembled slightly at this moment. At this moment, the old ancestor of the Underworld clan, who was about to die, finally understood something. He finally understood why the Wind God Horde Lord acted so aggressively when he asked for Emperor Lu Feng. He had originally thought that his arrogance had only angered the Wind God Horde Lord. However, behind him stood the Underworld clan, a pinnacle overlord race of the universe. Therefore, although he knew that his arrogance might have angered the Wind God Horde Lord, this old ancestor of the Underworld clan had no intention of restraining himself. He knew that if Yao Guangming was really bold, the most he would do was to teach him a lesson and embarrass him. He had the Underworld clan and a universe supreme behind him, so Yao Guangming wouldn't go too far. However, who would have thought that the punishment would be so severe that he would be killed directly? Now that he heard the Wind God Horde Lord's words, the old ancestor of the Underworld clan finally understood. It turned out that the one who saved Yao Guangming's life once was the human king Lu family. The demon he wanted to find and kill was the Emperor, and the real name of the Emperor was Lu Feng. Therefore, it was normal that Yao Guangming wanted to kill him. Just as the Nether clan's old ancestor came to a sudden realization, a figure slowly walked out from the other side of the light. It was a gentle step. It was so indifferent, so relaxed. There was no commotion, no commotion. However, such a simple step crossed a distance of hundreds of millions of miles. When the Nether clan's ancestor saw that step, a trace of understanding finally appeared in his eyes. He finally understood why Yao Guangming was able to kill him and why he dared to do so. Life-death quasi-king. No wonder, standing quietly at the spot where the old ancestor of the Underworld clan fell, Yao Guangming's lips curled into a disdainful smile. In the current world, Yao Guangming had really reached the pinnacle of the Hall of Great Beings. Perhaps there were people who could kill him and destroy him. However, such people were too few and far between. At the very least, he knew that the ancestor of the Underworld King, who had been severely injured by the Divine King and then tried to break the path of the Divine King Lu Tao, was no longer at the peak of his strength in the past. He couldn't. After all, at that time, the God Slayer could be considered to have entered the peak of the 7th-level Sovereign Dao domain. Such a monstrous genius of the Divine King's era would have to suffer the backlash of the universe if he wanted to break his path. Therefore, although the ancestor of the Underworld King still had a terrifying reputation, he didn't have the strength to kill him for the time being. By the time the ancestor of the Underworld King recovers his power, countless monstrous geniuses would have already entered a whole new realm. How big of a storm can a mere ancestor of the Underworld King cause? There was an indifferent smile on his incomparably free and easy face. Suddenly, Yao Guangming turned around and looked at all the existences in the world who were watching him. At this moment, his face seemed to be in a trance, a kind of hazy. When the ancestor of the Underworld race died, many existences were already stunned. Any virtual king above the 5th level of the Void Realm was the ultimate foundation of a race. Casually killing such an existence was undoubtedly provoking this race. If the Underworld race was just an ordinary race, then perhaps it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, Yao Guangming was too powerful. However, it was different now because he had offended the Underworld race, a peak Overlord race. Whether it was for the sake of face or for the previous matter, the Underworld race would probably not let go. They would carry on until the end. Many people seem to have seen the world shattering and the scene of dusk descending. Many existences had already decided that once they discovered the existence of the Underworld race, they must immediately leave this place. Looking at these trembling people, Yao Guangming naturally understood what they were thinking. However, he didn't care about this anymore. After thousands of years of accumulation, the resources he possessed had already reached a terrifying level. Moreover, to the current him, divine objects and resources didn't matter anymore. He was already standing at the peak of the realm. In the current universe, there might still be things for him to pursue. However, those things were really too few and far between. Offending the Underworld race? Perhaps others would be afraid. But Yao Guangming didn't have the slightest bit of fear. Not to mention whether the Underworld King had the strength to descend. Even if he did, Yao Guangming would at most give up on the Wind God territory. This was no big deal. Looking at all the existences in the world, after a moment of silence, Yao Guangming's voice finally rang out slowly. The Overlord of the Wind God territory is me, Yao Guangming. The law of heaven and earth here is me. I don't care what level of battle you're going to have. I don't care who you're going to fight or who you're going to be enemies with. However, in my Wind God territory, the protector behind you is absolutely not allowed to make a move. Once the two geniuses and the evildoer started a fight, the protector behind them would definitely come out. The result of that would naturally be incomparably terrifying. This time, if Yao Guangming wasn't excessively powerful and directly killed the ancestor of the Underworld race, the aftermath of the battle between the two would be enough to destroy the entire Wind God city countless times. Even if it was an ordinary collision between the virtual king and the ancestor, it would be enough to cause a certain amount of damage to the entire Wind God territory. Such a situation was undoubtedly a slap to Yao Guangming's face. One had to know that the current Yao Guangming didn't care much about the Wind God territory. However, he cared a lot about his own face. As his voice rang out, it actually started to radiate in all directions. Sensing such a change, many existences were inwardly shocked. These people were the true almighty existences. They were all terrifying kings of the virtual king realm. However, at this moment, these almighty kings didn't dare to say a word, because as the true peak existences, they naturally saw through Yao Guangming's realm. Life and death quasi-king, even the ultimate limit, life, realm, quasi-king. No wonder he can be so domineering. Life realm quasi-king was the ultimate limit of the virtual king realm. In other words, if Yao Guangming could still make a breakthrough, then his next realm would be the true supreme of the universe. a life and death quasi-king, even the ultimate life realm quasi-king. Such an existence belongs to the absolute peak existence in the entire universe. Those who aren't peak overlords can't afford to offend him. As for the wind god territory lord, after entering this realm, he no longer has any burdens. Even the peak overlord races don't dare to offend him. This time, the nether race is so domineering without understanding the situation. No wonder they are unlucky. For an invincible existence like Yao Guangming in the outer region battlefield, he didn't care about status at all. Therefore, once he was truly angered, the nether race would probably be in for a bad time. Seeing that many existences were silent, Yao Guangming nodded lightly. Turning around, his figure slowly dissipated. Seeing Yao Guangming disappear, many people finally stood up. However, many existences were endlessly silent. They really didn't expect such an ending. The ancestor of the nether race is a virtual king realm existence above the 5th level of the void realm. Even he was annihilated in one blow. Then, we should also pay attention. Chapter 431. A guardian of the king realm finally walked out of the void and spoke slowly to an unknown demon. At this moment, the monster finally discovered the existence of his guardian ancestor. Without any hesitation, he saluted respectfully. Similar situations appeared one after another. Many protectors appeared one after another and began to warn the people they were protecting to be more cautious. Of course, some demons were disdainful of such a situation. This was because they knew that the wind god Overlord only restricted the king realm powerhouses. There were not many restrictions on them. Therefore, these people did not think much of it. What happened in the wind god territory quickly spread throughout the outer region battlefield. However, such a situation did not cause an intense uproar. This was because the same news continued to spread from the 36 territories in the outer region battlefield. Even in the territories controlled by the top overlords, many existences prohibited the powerhouses from taking action. Otherwise, they would be killed endlessly. Without the protection of many mighty experts, more geniuses began to appear and enter the battlefield of the outer region one after another. Among them, many were famous emperors of their races. There were also peerless geniuses from the Massacre Abyss who were titled the Emperor of Massacre. There was even a large race and the hidden sealed bloodline of the Divine King clan. Once these terrifying demons awakened, they would break through the layers of shackles and soar above the 9 heavens. Moreover, it was now the era of king wars. In this era, the geniuses and demons would undergo many shocking transformations. It could be said that the awakened invincible geniuses who were born in such an era could continuously create countless shocking miracles. In the battle of the wind god territory, the wind god Overlord Yao Guangming killed the ancient ancestor of the Nether clan with a single blow. This confirmed the rumors that Yao Guangming had stepped into the life and death quasi-king realm and became one of the invincible powerhouses of the current era. At the same time, the atmosphere in the wind god territory became solemn. Many powerhouses of the various races who came here to look for Lu Feng all stopped. Invincible powerhouses represented invincibility in a realm. Below the Divine King, as long as they were not related to the sovereign, no one was their opponent. It could be said that in the face of the quasi-king of life and death, the ordinary virtual king would be completely suppressed. Many existences were aware of this, so no one was willing to offend an invincible almighty, a quasi-monarch. Medicine God Territory, Medicine God City. The Medicine God Territory used to be the most prosperous territory among the independent territories. After all, most of the alchemists in the current universe were gathered here, and almost all the divine items that had appeared in the universe could be found here. However, during this period of time, the flow of people in the Medicine God domain had increased significantly. The Alchemist Alliance was located in the center of the main building. Wang Gui and the other alchemy grandmasters stood quietly in the void. This was one of the more peculiar places in the central building. Of course, only those alchemy grandmasters with extremely esteemed statuses could enter this place. In this place, the endless starry sky flickered. It seemed to be a different world, filled with a strange feeling. The 10 alchemy grandmasters stood quietly in the sky. Their faces were filled with a slightly solemn expression. After a long while, Grandmaster Yinaga's voice slowly rang out. This time, many existences have entered the medicine god territory. I'm afraid that the medicine god territory will become chaotic for some time to come. After saying this, Grandmaster Yintiga sighed softly. When they heard this, the other 9 alchemy grandmasters' expressions turned ugly. The flow of people in the medicine god territory was already incomparably large, and now that the alchemy conference was in progress, the flow of people had increased by more than 10 times. This was nothing in itself, but over the past few days, they had gradually sensed that something was wrong. Even though this conference was the grandest one, the number of people who had come this time was a little too ridiculous. Moreover, these people could sense that the number of freaks gathered here had far exceeded the usual limit. Wangue's expression was a little ugly when he glanced at Yingteja. He naturally knew the reason behind it. Wangue nodded at Yingteja's words. When the Immortal King appeared, Futu was shocked. The Immortal King is recognized as a monstrous existence of the era. Although Futu did not display the battle prowess of the era's monstrous genius, after the explanation of the Immortal King, everyone regarded him as a monstrous existence of the era's monstrous genius. Of these 2 freaks of the epic, one is a pinnacle spiritual force master, and the other is only a pinnacle spiritual force master. They are indeed freaks of the epic. It's a pity that their current strength is too weak. Wangue did not continue speaking. These people already knew what he meant. It seemed like what he said had nothing to do with what Yiniga said, but it was inevitable that there was a connection between the two. These people all understood the close connection between the two. If the Immortal King and Futu were pinnacle spiritual force masters or had directly entered the pinnacle demigod realm, then perhaps these freaks and geniuses of the other races would not have come here. After all, the Immortal King and Futu could be considered to have reached the peak of the younger generation. With the Immortal King and Futu's strength at the pinnacle of the 7th level, very few people would dare to challenge them. But it's different now. Many freaks and geniuses of the other races know the Two's realm. Although they are far inferior to the Two in terms of talent and heaven-defying degree, their current strength is far superior to the 2 of them. Therefore, these people came here to make a name for themselves in one battle. Although not all of them had such thoughts, there were still quite a number of them. As for the other geniuses and freaks, they probably also wanted to know more about the 2 freaks of the epic. In the outer region battlefield, strength is what matters. Even if you have the capital to defy the heavens, even if you have eternal aptitude, but before you truly reach great success, you will always be an ant with aptitude. Perhaps many people are willing to give the 2 freaks of the epic face and befriend them, but even more people want to defeat the 2 freaks of the epic. In this way, not only will they obtain shocking providence, but they will also gain great fame. These freaks and geniuses want to step on the Two's bones and ascend to the peak of their own path. Yuanling's voice sounded at the right time. This time, the 10 almighty grandmasters had gathered to discuss what might happen next. Although Yuanling, Yu Huayan, and the others did not get along very well with the other 7 alchemy grandmasters, they had no choice but to appear at this time. After all, there were also alchemy cultivators. The Immortal King has already left, and Futu's strength might not be enough to fight him. After all, we have never seen Futu's true combat strength. Although his alchemy skills are heaven-defying, no one has seen his true combat strength as a telekinesis master. For the sake of the future of alchemy, we can't let Futu take the risk. Huangmu's voice was also heard. In his opinion, Lu Feng probably only had talent, but did not have the corresponding combat strength. After all, it was publicly acknowledged that alchemy cultivators had weak combat strength. Of course, if he had known about Lu Feng's battle outside Green Mist City, he would not have said all this. Unfortunately, These people had not done much research on Lufeng. After all, it had been brought by Wang Gui. We also agree with this point. However, what if these geniuses and freaks fight in Medicine God City? You have to know that these are not just geniuses and freaks from one or a few races. These are a large number of freaks and geniuses from various races in the current universe. Moreover, they're all protected by ancient powerhouses. If they are not careful, it will cause an earth-shattering battle. A battle between two divine beings could easily wipe out the entire Medicine God City. After all, Medicine God City was only a little bigger than a second-grade life planet. It was not very difficult for divine beings to destroy it. Hearing this, many existences fell silent. The Alchemy Alliance was indeed one of the most respected organizations in the world. Moreover, no one dared to offend the Alchemy Alliance alone. However, it was different this time, because these monstrous geniuses represented all the monstrous geniuses in the entire universe. Behind them were almost all the powerful races and forces in the current universe. With such a complicated relationship, even the Alchemy Alliance would have a headache. Moreover, the people in the Alchemy Alliance were basically alchemists. The combat power of alchemists was extremely weak. Once a violent conflict occurred, they would not have the slightest ability to do anything. Therefore, at this moment, many people were completely speechless. The other territories have issued a law that does not allow many almighty powerhouses to fight in their territories. Let's do the same. After hesitating for a moment, Grandmaster Tan Hui said slowly. Hearing this, many Grandmasters fell silent again. How could they not think this way? Unfortunately, although the Medicine God territory was one of the most powerful territories in the foreign battlefield, the Alchemy Alliance did not have many powerful people. On the surface, the strongest people in the Alchemy Alliance were the Alchemy Grandmasters. Of course, any one of them was a Supreme Master no weaker than an Origin King. However, there were only 11 of them. As for the people who had come, the number was extremely terrifying. Moreover, they could only fight against ordinary Monarch Realm Almighties. Once they encountered those ancient Monarch Realm Almighties, they would not even be able to fight back. Previously, the Wind God territory sent news that the Underworld race even sent a 5th-level Void Realm Almighty for the human race's Emperor. If that 5th-level Void Realm Almighty descends on the Medicine God territory, then who among us can resist? Even if it was a true Invincible Almighty or a Quasi-Life and Death Realm Almighty, there would not be much of a difference in status between them, let alone a 5th-level Void Realm Almighty. The 13 great Alchemy Grandmasters were all qualified to look at the Quasi-Life and Death Realm Almighty. However, they could only look at the Quasi-Life and Death Realm Almighty because they were Alchemy Grandmasters. If they really relied on strength, then they would not be on the same level as the Quasi-Life and Death Realm Almighty. Moreover, they did not even have the strength to fight against a 5th-level Void Realm Almighty, let alone a Quasi-Life and Death Realm Almighty. Therefore, once these terrifying existences descended, they would not even have the strength to stop them. This time, many foreign Monarch Realm Almighties will descend. A few of them might be afraid of the Alchemy Alliance's reputation, but with so many of them appearing at the same time, once a battle breaks out, it will be chaos. When that time comes, who will care about our existence? Grandmaster Wan Yuan frowned slightly, with a helpless look on his face. The other 9 Alchemy Grandmasters were speechless. Chapter 432. The reason why the other 35 territories dared to make such a statement was because they had the confidence to do so. Their overlords were terrifying existences that could suppress everything. These guardians were simply no match for their overlords. Therefore, in those territories, many guardians had to be quiet and well-behaved. However, it was different in the Medicine God territory. They did not have any overlords. On the surface, the strongest people were only the 13 great Alchemy Grandmasters. If it was during normal times, the 13 great Alchemy Grandmasters would be considered pretty good. After all, They were 13 almighty existences. However, at such a special time, just them alone was not enough. It was far from enough. Don't tell me we have to use the hidden strength of the Alchemist Alliance. Although the Alchemist Alliance was an alchemist alliance, it had experienced hundreds of millions of years of development. Its hidden strength was also astonishing. If they really used their hidden strength, then all of this was nothing. However, when the alchemy grandmasters heard about their hidden strength, they shook their heads one after another. A hidden strength was a strength that could only be used in times of crisis. If they used their hidden strength just for such a matter, then the Alchemist Alliance would really be a laughingstock. Impatience appeared on the faces of the alchemy grandmasters. They really could not think of a better way. If there's no other way, then let's contact those old friends. With them around, it should be easy to suppress everything. Every alchemy grandmaster had many old friends. The strength of those old friends was also terrifying existences that could shake everything. If those great existences really did descend, then this time wouldn't be a big deal. However, when they heard this suggestion, many of them shook their heads at the same time. This is a matter of the Alchemist Alliance. If we rely on those old friends for such a matter, then how can the Alchemist Alliance establish itself in the future? Everyone was speechless when their suggestions were rejected one by one. However, just as these existences were at their most vexed, a voice suddenly rang in their ears. On that very day, Medicine God City issued the same rule. Many of the Guardians were not allowed to fight in Medicine God City. Otherwise, they would have to bear the consequences. When the news came out, many of the Guardians were slightly surprised. They did not understand why Medicine God City was so strong. Although Medicine God City was one of the most prosperous cities in the 36 territories, everyone knew that in terms of strength, Medicine God City was undoubtedly the weakest. However, since Medicine God City had issued such a statement, many of the Guardians could not be easily offended unless it was a last resort. After all, although the Alchemist Alliance was not strong, there were too many existences that were related to it. Therefore, these Guardians were not willing to offend this ancient organization unless it was an urgent situation. Moreover, they knew that the Alchemist Alliance had existed for hundreds of millions of years. However, up until now, he had not even comprehended the power of death, let alone the two supreme powers of life and death. Although his body had been imprinted with the mark of life and death when he had been in the abyss of life and death, that had only been obtained through external means. It had only given him the qualifications to comprehend the power of life and death, as well as a path to understand the power of life and death. Whether or not he could reach the end depended on Lu Feng himself. When there were only 10 days left, Lu Feng stopped cultivating. He had already left the spiritual sea divine plane and was standing quietly in the empty void. It seems like I have failed this time. It was the last 10 days. Lu Feng knew that he had failed. In these 10 days, he couldn't comprehend anything at all. However, Lu Feng was only slightly disappointed. After all, he had already expected the result before this. The power of life and death is indeed something that only the life and death quasi-monarchs can come into contact with. Only the heaven-defying life and death quasi-monarchs can comprehend this terrifying supreme power. Any one of them would not be weaker than the power of the Yellow Springs or my bloodline power. If I could comprehend it, it would be incomparably terrifying. Unfortunately, the time is too short. I have still failed. During these 400 days, Lu Feng had been pacing back and forth on the edge. He seemed to be only one step away from the imprints of life and death. However, it was this one step that made Lu Feng understand what was called sorrow and helplessness. It is my fortune to obtain it, but it is my fate to lose it. Since I have not succeeded, there is no need to force it. Lu Feng smiled and shook his head. He did not want to think about it anymore. He still remembered the saying, "It is my fortune to obtain it, but it is my fate to lose it." Back then, he had said this to Wang Gui. After calculating the time, Lu Feng did not continue cultivating. There was no point in cultivating in these 10 days. Therefore, Lu Feng gave up on cultivating. According to the time, after about 3 months, I should be able to reach the small success stage of the primordial scripture's third realm, the divine state. At that time, I will have broken through to the level of a spiritual psychic master. Moreover, after becoming a spiritual psychic master, my strength will have another breakthrough. The biggest help is the appearance of the second spirit. Now that the second spirit had appeared, it was a pity that it could not use any power. This was because this was only a newborn second spirit. Its power was limited. However, after reaching the small success stage of the divine state, this would not be the case. At that time, the second spirit would be able to completely appear and fight together with Lu Feng. I really want to see if I, with the second spirit, can raise my strength to another level. His emperor power, coupled with the monstrous strength of a peak 6-level king, Dao, domain expert, and the combination of the main body and the second spirit, the power was definitely not a matter of 1 + 1 = 2. This kind of combination could cause an absolutely terrifying qualitative change. Staying in this space, Lu Feng rested for 10 days. Although there was nothing here, these 10 days of peace made Lu Feng feel unusually comfortable. He had not been like this for a long time, peacefully alone. Finally, when the last day arrived, Lu Feng opened his eyes. He had already felt the slight trembling in the void. Lu Feng knew that this was because the power in the realm of time was insufficient. It was time to leave. Taking a deep breath, Lu Feng slowly stood up and ran toward the entrance he came from. After a few moments, he saw the direction of the entrance. This place had been opened by Taratus again. Of course, if it was not opened, once the time was up, a temporary gap would appear here. Therefore, Lu Feng was never worried that he could not get out. Finally, after a step, Lu Feng still left the realm of time. Greetings to His Majesty Master Taratus. Looking at Taratus, who had been waiting in front of him, Lu Feng felt slightly grateful. Lu Feng knew why Taratus was here. He wasn't here to keep an eye on Lu Feng, but to monitor the situation and prevent any accidents from happening to him. Lu Feng would always remember this kind of help. Seeing Lu Feng's appearance, Taratus's face showed a strange expression. He was a heavenly master, which was equivalent to a king realm expert. Naturally, he could easily feel that Lu Feng was different. Fudo, look at these 3 days. The 600 days in the realm of time have helped you a lot. Taratus knew that Lu Feng came here to comprehend the Pill Sutra. However, he did not ask how much Lu Feng had comprehended or if he had not comprehended at all. If Lu Feng was willing to say, he would naturally say it. If he did not want to say it, he was afraid that what he knew would be false. Therefore, Taratus only asked a general question and did not ask in detail. Lu Feng faintly smiled and lightly nodded his head. He knew that Taratus most likely also wanted to know the extent of his understanding of the pill mantra. However, he was unable to tell the truth. After all, he had comprehended all 6 parts of the Pill Sutra. If he said it, he was afraid that it would be too heaven-defying. Therefore, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment and did not mention that he had comprehended the Pill Sutra. Very good. The cultivation this time has helped me a lot. Thank you for the help of the Alchemist Alliance and the Senior Masters. Futu, I will not forget. Indeed, these 600 days in the realm of time had helped him a little too much. Although his strength did not increase by much, the changes during this period of time had given Lu Feng potential. It had given Lu Feng a stronger transformation potential. Taratus smiled and nodded gently. Therefore, he was willing to spend 6 peak 8th grade divine items to let Lu Feng enter this place. Besides Alchemist Saint Rong's words, it was more because Taratus valued Lu Feng very much. However, Taratus also knew that Lu Feng was still Lu Feng of the human race. It could be seen from his Wan Gui's and Su Ling's attitudes. Therefore, being able to have some relationship with Lu Feng and making Lu Feng have a good impression of the Alchemist Alliance was enough. After all, no one could say what step Lu Feng would take in the future. All right, I won't say any polite words. Here, this is also your champion's reward. Lu Feng shook his head gently, but did not say anything. This was because he knew that an ordinary champion with a great background would at most be rewarded with a high-grade 8th grade divine item. However, he was rewarded with 6-peak 8th grade divine items. Foot 2. These days, the other senior masters have been very annoyed because of you. Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. He seemed to have been in the realm of time these days. Inside, there was no longer any relationship with the outside world. So why would Taradas still say that? Seeing Lu Feng's blank expression, Taradas smiled slightly and said directly, "You should know the meaning of your identity." "My identity?" Lu Feng asked in return, sounding a little confused. However, he soon understood. He nodded gently and said, "Senior Master Taradas, are you talking about the identity of the monstrous genius of this era after being together with the immortal king?" Chapter 433. Taradas nodded. "That's right. Back then, the immortal king once said that you were at the same level as him. He even came here to challenge you. Therefore, in the eyes of many people, although you haven't shown anything, you must be the epic evildoer on the path of Psyche Masters." Lu Feng smiled bitterly. He was indeed the epic evildoer. However, this was only for his martial arts path. If he were a Psyche Master, then perhaps he would be infinitely close to the epic evildoer. However, he still wasn't one. Perhaps after his primitive immortal power evolved, he could become the epic evildoer on the path of Psyche Masters. However, he wasn't one yet. When he saw Lu Feng's bitter smile, Taradas thought that Lu Feng had admitted it. He continued, "Your strength is only that of a pinnacle Psyche Master. The immortal king is only a pinnacle spiritual Psyche Master. Although your aptitudes are terrifying and heaven-defying, there are many geniuses and evildoers who can surpass you in terms of combat strength. Naturally, these people won't let go of this opportunity to challenge you. It's a pity that the immortal king left a few days ago. Even we didn't manage to find out his whereabouts. Moreover, the strength that the immortal king displayed was a little too terrifying. Unless one's combat strength reached the pinnacle of the demigod realm, no one would be a match for him. This way, everyone's eyes will be focused on you." Taladas's words were already very clear. However, after hearing this, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a cold light. These people thought that he was easy to bully and that he, Lu Feng, was a weakling. After taking a deep breath, Lu Feng looked at Taradas and asked, "Then, Your Majesty, these people have come here to challenge me?" Taradas nodded his head gently. When he saw this, the coldness in Lu Feng's eyes became even more obvious. "In that case, there's no need to trouble yourself. According to my extreme standards, let those challengers come." Lu Feng wasn't an idiot. Although he was a little crazy, he wasn't the kind of person who would only act impulsively. According to Lu Feng's standards, which was 7 times the limit of Lu Feng's current level. Foot 2. Actually, you don't have to fight them. Us alchemists aren't suited for combat. Although you might be. After a slight pause, as if he felt that it wasn't very good to say this, he changed his words. Although you're the epic evildoer level of a demigod, your mind power is mutated level, so your combat strength is greatly. You will definitely be at a disadvantage. Looking at Taradas, Lu Feng faintly smiled and bowed to Taradas, feeling somewhat moved. Who was Taradas? He was one of the 13 alchemy grandmasters in the world and was the closest to becoming a saint alchemist. He was also the #1 elder of the Alchemist Alliance. Not to mention anything else, just his strength alone was enough to compare with any almighty in the king realm. Regardless of whether it was strength or status, such an existence was extremely noble. How could Lu Feng not be touched when he was persuading him like this? Alchemist Taradas, Your Majesty, I understand what you mean. However, besides being an alchemist, I'm also a psychic master. As an epic evildoer, how can I take half a step back when facing a challenge of the same level? I can't accept such an outcome. Also, I hope you still remember that I am a young man. I'm a young man, so I am impulsive. There was no need to say anything else. Just this statement alone was enough. Taradas was silent for a moment. After a long time, he sighed slightly and finally looked at Lu Feng again. All right, I understand. I will release the news later. Only those with peak perfect stage or psychic master combat strength below the king realm can challenge me. Lu Feng nodded gently. He bowed respectfully to Talatus again. If it had been Emperor Lu Feng, he would have been able to suppress a high-level perfect stage martialist in an instant. After all, when Emperor Lu Feng entered the most extreme situation, although he had only crossed 7 levels, he could suppress an ordinary peak perfect stage warrior. However, if it was Psychic Fudu, it would be a little difficult. Of course, this was only a little difficult. Previously, outside Qinglan City, I used the most powerful power. Under the extreme eruption, I killed so many perfect stage warriors. I even easily suppressed mid-level perfect stage warriors. However, it is a pity that it is a little difficult when facing high-level psychic masters. During the battle outside Qinglan City, Lu Feng had stacked Qingming Sky more than 10 times and even directly shattered mid-level perfect stage warriors into nothingness. However, he was still unable to kill a high-level perfect stage warrior. At the last moment, when he did not use martial power, he even needed Jehua Weiwa to finally kill them. However, this time, I have to try again. After all, at that time, I had just advanced and was not very strong. This time, after stepping into the highest level, my power should have improved a lot. I just don't know if it can really pose a threat to high-level perfect stage warriors. While thinking, Lu Feng had already walked down from the moving track. The place he came to was an extremely terrifying hall. Although it couldn't be compared to the place where the sacred items were stored, this room was only second to the treasure vault that contained the sacred items that Lu Feng had seen. Following Talatus, Lu Feng walked in together. However, after entering, Lu Feng discovered the real situation of this huge room. This is actually an independent space. Looking at Lu Feng's slightly shocked expression, Talatus smiled gently. All the major races have their own clans and countless territories. Even the territory of a third-rate race is countless times larger than my medicine god city. Lu Feng nodded gently. Although the entire medicine god territory belonged to the Alchemist Alliance, the only place where alchemists were really active was Medicine God City. Medicine God City's area was only equivalent to a second-grade life planet. In terms of size, it was indeed not even comparable to the territory of the smallest race. Moreover, the only real building of the Alchemist Alliance is this Alliance Center. Perhaps you think that this Alliance Center is grand enough, but it is far from enough to store everything that the Alchemist Alliance has accumulated for hundreds of millions of years. Hearing this, Lu Feng fell silent. After a while, he nodded gently and said directly, "The space is only so big, but it cannot meet the needs." Therefore, this exclusive space appeared in the Alliance Center building. Talatus smiled gently and nodded. The treasure trove you saw is an independent space. The internal space is dozens of times larger than the entire Medicine God City. It is not inferior to some super life planets. It is the same here as well. However, this independent space is only the size of Medicine God City. In addition to the 2 places you saw, there are about 30 similar independent spaces of various sizes in the Alliance Center building. There are even teleportation portals that lead to the various races' territories. After hearing this, Lu Feng took a deep breath. He now knew that the Alliance Center building was actually so big. Although it looked like an internal building of Medicine God City, it was actually much, much bigger than the entire Medicine God City. This is simply a city within a city. There were even teleportation portals. This could definitely be considered a city within a city. Talatus was still smiling. However, this smile was mixed with a lot of pride. A city within a city was indeed not bad. When they built the Alliance Center building, they built it according to the standards of a city, a miracle. The 2 of them walked into the hall, or rather, the independent space in the starry sky. Inside, there are all kinds of nomological powers. It was not much different from the space outside. This feeling puzzled Lu Feng. Seeing Lu Feng's puzzled look, Talatus said indifferently, This conference center is also the daily training center for us alchemists. Although it is not the largest, and is even ranked at the back, it is still very valuable. However, its value is the most terrifying. This is because my ancestor used a supreme power to directly cut out a space from the original universe. After that, he used countless 8th grade and even 9th grade divine objects to finally completely stabilize this space. Lu Feng took a deep breath. There was a look of shock in his eyes. Directly cut out from the universe, powerhouses could easily annihilate an area or even a part of space and time. However, all they could do was destroy. It was almost impossible for them to cut out a part of space and time. After all, cutting out space and annihilating space were two completely different realms. Talatus took a light step forward and covered a huge distance. Lu Feng also knew a little about this situation. Previously, in the spatial fortress, this was the situation. The laws of this world had been changed. Even an ordinary person could teleport as long as he wanted to. Lu Feng also took a light step forward and followed behind Talatus. Beside them, there were countless objects floating in the void. It seemed like this was the place where some of the alchemists of the Alchemist Alliance cultivated. When the two of them stopped, they had already arrived in front of an open-air plaza. Although this plaza was not very big, Lu Feng felt a terrifying, intense fluctuation from it. Lu Feng understood that this was definitely not a simple plaza. This thing was probably also an artifact with a huge amount of power. When the two of them landed on the plaza, the other 7 grandmasters suddenly appeared. Among them, except for the 3 grandmasters who had some conflicts with the Alchemist Alliance, the other grandmasters appeared. When he saw them, Lu Feng saluted them one by one. These people were sizing up Lu Feng with slightly strange gazes. If Talatus could see Lu Feng's transformation, then these people, who were at the same level as Talatus, could also see it easily. After a while, Wang Gui laughed heartily and walked over to Lu Feng's side. Futu, it seems like your harvest this time is not small. This harvest was indeed not small. Lu Feng also understood that if it had not been for Wang Gui's help, he would not have had such an opportunity. Plus, Lu Feng had a kind of respect for this alchemy grandmaster, who had sacrificed a lot for the human race. Therefore, when Wang Gui finished speaking, Lu Feng immediately said, "Thank you for your help this time, President." Wang Gui, who understood Lu Feng's meaning, waved his hand gently. "Actually, without me, you would have been able to reach this point. At most, you would have just spent a little more time." Wang Gui did not care, but Lu Feng could not help but care. Indeed, without this realm, he would have just spent a little more time. However, time was what Lu Feng lacked the most right now. Therefore, Wang Gui's help was really a big help. Of course, since Wang Gui said this, Lu Feng would not say anything more. He was used to keeping all the thanks in his heart. Futu, you entered this realm to comprehend the alchemy scripture. Now that the time has come, how has your comprehension gone? Chapter 434. Su Ling walked to Lu Feng's side and asked after a moment of hesitation. At that moment, all the grandmasters turned their gazes over. Even Taratus was no exception. He had wanted to ask before, but didn't. This time, it was Lu Feng's elder, a human being, who asked. Naturally, it had nothing to do with Taratus. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment. Finally, he smiled and said, "The effect is not bad. This time, I comprehended a few parts of the Pill Sutra." A few parts of the Pill Sutra? Lu Feng only mentioned a few parts, but not many. After all, 2 parts were still a few parts, and 6 parts were still a few parts. He left everything up to them to guess. These people naturally understood what Lu Feng meant, although they didn't know why. However, they understood that Lu Feng didn't want to say, so they didn't continue to ask. However, they were slightly surprised. It seems that Futa's harvest this time is terrifying. You must have comprehended at least 2 parts of the Pill Sutra. Including the one you comprehended before, you have comprehended at least 3 parts of the Pill Sutra. This is already comparable to the greatest existence in the history of the Alchemist Alliance, a realm Saint Alchemist. A realm Saint Alchemist was an existence who had comprehended 3 parts of the Pill Sutra. Lu Feng had also comprehended 3 parts, so naturally it was the same. However, everyone knew that a realm Saint Alchemist might not have comprehended only 3 parts. That was why he had only comprehended 3 parts, because there were only so many of them in the Alchemist Alliance. All right, Fudu, you can go down and consolidate your knowledge. If you want, you can go to the alchemy room. There are many divine objects there. You can use them to verify what you have learned. Ing Taija said with a smile. Toward an alchemy Dao freak like Lu Feng, they were willing to pay a little. Moreover, they had already taken out 6 pinnacle grade 8 divine objects. Naturally, they didn't lack grade 4 or grade 5 divine objects. That's true. Fudu, you can go. From tomorrow onwards, we will take turns teaching you. If you're interested, you can come out and listen. Wang Gui also spoke. He knew that Lu Feng had comprehended 3 parts of the Pill Sutra. He was afraid that in theory, it was already very terrifying. Whether or not he listened to their lessons was not very important. Lu Feng looked at the grandmasters, but did not leave immediately. Instead, he stood there and hesitated for a moment. After a while, he finally spoke. Your Majesties, actually Futu needs your help with something. The grandmasters looked at each other and nodded lightly. Yiniga glanced at Taradas and said, Speak, if possible, we won't refuse. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. After glancing at the 8 alchemy grandmasters, he slowly opened his mouth and said solemnly, I hope that the esteemed grandmasters can help me select my opponents for the competition. The grandmasters fell silent. Wang Gui pondered this for a moment before he looked at Lu Feng and asked, You already know? Lu Feng nodded his head gently. President, His Holiness Grandmaster Delatus has already told me that since these people are coming for me, I'll take them on. Lu Feng's expression was very indifferent. When they saw this, the grandmasters had strange expressions on their faces. Wang Gui sighed softly. Futu, I know your strength. Wang Gui emphasized the word strength. He and Su Ling knew Lu Feng's identity. He was an emperor. However, although you're a freakish telekinesis master, you are an alchemy master. Your combat strength is definitely limited. Your telekinesis skills are extremely limited. Lu Feng knew what Wang Gui meant. Wang Gui was obviously reminding him of his identity. He was reminding him that he was a human Futu, while he was only a telekinesis master Futu. Wang Gui was worried that Luo Yinyang would be exposed. Lu Feng had naturally thought of this. This time, he had intended to accept all challenges as a telekinesis master. Therefore, he wouldn't expose himself unless he met some acquaintances of the human race or people who had seen him during the Battle of the Massacre Abyss. Therefore, Lu Feng smiled faintly and said without hesitation, President, I know all this. Although I am an alchemy master, I'm also a telekinesis master. As a freakish genius, my combat strength is naturally not too bad. When he saw that Wang Gui still wanted to say something, Lu Feng hurriedly said what he wanted to say. President, I think you should understand me. Although I am an alchemy master now, I am still a freakish genius. If I don't fight when I can, then I'm afraid that I'll be greatly hindered in my future cultivation path. Wang Gui's expression changed slightly when he heard Lu Feng's words. He knew that Lu Feng was right. If Lu Feng was really just an alchemy master, then it wouldn't be a big deal if he didn't make any progress on the path of martial arts. However, the problem was that Lu Feng wasn't. Perhaps he was dazzling enough on the path of alchemy, but compared to his true identity, the path of alchemy wasn't much. What the human race needed was a freakish genius who could lead the human race to prosperity, not an alchemy master who could refine elixirs. Therefore, Wang Gui fell silent and didn't say anything. Gu Gui glanced at Lu Feng and then at Wang Gui. Previously, he had already vaguely known Lu Feng's identity, so at this moment, he could understand the meaning behind their words. It was best for him to step forward at this time. In that case, let's do it this way. If Futu wants to fight, then let's fight. However, Fudu, what kind of standard do you want us to follow? Outside, there would be countless freakish geniuses clamoring to challenge Lu Feng. However, Lu Feng belonged to the Alchemy Master Alliance. If it didn't fight, the biggest impact wouldn't be on Lu Feng, but on the Alchemy Master Alliance. If Lu Feng wanted to fight, this could be considered half of the Alchemy Master Alliance's hopes. Lu Feng glanced at Gu Gue. Lu Feng was also closer to this Alchemy Master, who was closer to Wang Gue. Lu Feng didn't hesitate to answer his question, as he had already mentioned it to Taradas before he came. Master Gu Gue, I won't deliberately bully those with weak strength. Of course, I can't compete with those freakish geniuses who are close to great success. Therefore, I hope to find some fair opponents. Fair opponents meant that the opponents Lu Feng wanted were opponents who could increase his strength to the limit. However, these people didn't know what Lu Feng's limit was. Previously, the Immortal King had already said that Lu Feng was a freakish genius who was on the same level as him. However, these people didn't dare to be so sure. Lu Feng was naturally aware of the concerns of many alchemy masters. As a psychic master, he was only equivalent to a peak 7th level King Dao Freak and a 6th level King Dao Freak. However, with those trump cards, Lu Feng was confident that he could fight against a 7th level King Dao Freak. Therefore, Lu Feng directly said 7th level King Dao Freak. Futu, why don't you think about it again? After all, you are an alchemy master. Although you're also a psychic master, because of the existence of an alchemy master, your combat strength might not be that strong. You don't have to force yourself according to those standards. The person who spoke was Alchemy Master Yingtika. If there was one person who disagreed with Lu Feng's decision to fight, it would be him. In his opinion, Lu Feng was the pride of a future alchemy master. He was the hope of the future alchemy masters. Therefore, martial artists, psychic masters, and King Dao freaks were all just floating clouds. Now that Lu Feng had already expressed that he would definitely fight, he naturally wanted Lu Feng's opponent to be a little weaker. This was the only way to ensure Lu Feng's safety. Evidently, his opinion had also received the support of a few alchemy masters. However, Lu Feng just smiled and shook his head. What he wanted was a real battle, not a boring one where victory was guaranteed. If that was really the case, then Lu Feng wouldn't participate at all. This time, Lu Feng would start to familiarize himself with the combat style of a psychic master. After all, once he had a second primordial spirit, the combat style of psychic master would become one of his main combat methods. Alchemy Master Yingtika, it's all right. Don't worry, I won't clash with anyone who has surpassed the 7th level. Although I really want to fight, I know my own strength very well. When she saw that Lu Feng had already made up his mind, Yingtika didn't say anything else. She just nodded her head gently. In that case, let's find someone among those people. According to Fudu's level, which is equivalent to a peak perfect martial artist or a psychic master, it is not allowed. If that's the case, there shouldn't be any problems. Although they didn't know whether Lu Feng would win, these people didn't have to worry too much about Lu Feng's safety. With such a collision, if Lu Feng really encountered any danger, he would definitely be killed. They would definitely step in. In the eyes of these people, rules were far less important than Lu Feng's safety. Then let's wait until 11 days before the competition begins. In the next 11 days, the 11 alchemy grandmasters would give lectures. They wouldn't allow any clashes during their time. This was a rule and a sign of respect. It was a sign of respect for the alchemy grandmasters and the Alchemy Master Alliance. Many of the alchemy grandmasters nodded their heads in agreement. However, at this moment, Wang Gue suggested an idea. Actually, we don't have to wait until then. Let's do it today. When they heard Wang Gue's suggestion, these people were slightly puzzled. They hadn't said today because they had just returned from 400 days of comprehension. In their opinion, Lu Feng must have worked very hard. After all, 400 days of comprehension was very difficult. The consumption of mind power was also a terrifying figure. The combat power of a psychic master relied on mind power. If Lu Feng fought now, he probably wouldn't be able to display his full strength. Lu Feng also looked at Wang Gui doubtfully. He didn't understand what Wang Gui was thinking. Looking at these people's expressions, Wang Gui smiled slightly and explained. After 11 days, more and more geniuses and monsters will come. If we hold the competition then, I'm afraid Fudu won't be able to handle it. After he finishes dealing with the first batch, there will be a second batch and a third batch. In that case, Fudu won't have time to cultivate in peace. If we hold the competition today, then the number of people coming will be limited. At most, he will fight until tomorrow. At that time, our lectures will be held. Even if there are still geniuses and monsters who want to challenge Fudu, they will be prohibited. Hearing this, these alchemy grandmasters understood. They nodded their heads gently. Their expressions showed that they had completely agreed. Chapter 435. Indeed, if Lu Feng held a public competition 11 days later, the sky beasts and monsters from all over the universe would come in an endless stream. It could be said that from then on, Lu Feng would be completely immersed in endless battles. However, if it was changed now, the fighting would only last until the next day. Because of the arrival of the 11 Grandmasters, all the killing and fighting would be forced to stop. Naturally, the battle between Lu Feng and the other monstrous geniuses would also be completely stopped. Lu Feng also understood Wang Gui's thoughts at this moment. He knew that Wang Gui was thinking for him. Lu Feng felt even more respect for such a wise man of the human race. Wang Gui looked at Lu Feng and asked, Futu, I don't know if you're willing to do this. If you're not used to it, it is also possible to change it to 11 days later. Lu Feng nodded gently. Although he liked fighting, Lu Feng did not like this kind of endless battles. Moreover, his opponents were ordinary geniuses and monsters. Moreover, he was using Futu's identity to fight so that he could familiarize himself with the combat experience of a telekinesis master. This way, he would be more proficient and adapt to the battles after his second soul reached the small success stage. Therefore, Lu Feng had no objections to this arrangement. I am in a very good state now, President. This is very good. Since Lu Feng did not mind, the other grandmasters naturally had no objections. These days, the clamoring of those geniuses and monsters had really made these people a little impatient. If possible, they also hoped to end everything as soon as possible. In that case, let's release the news directly. In a while, it will be held in front of the main building of the Alchemist Alliance. When the time comes, a few of us will appear and help Futu. The presence of 8 Grandmasters was undoubtedly a very shocking and luxurious lineup. This also reflected the importance that the Alchemist Alliance attached to Lu Feng. When the news spread, it quickly made the bustling Medicine Divine City boil. The number of alchemists in Medicine God City was less than 1/10,000th of the total population of the city. In the eyes of most martial artists and psyche masters, such a battle between freaks was undoubtedly worth watching. Therefore, when the news spread, the entire Divine Medicine City frantically rushed to the main building of the Alchemist Alliance. When they came out of the central building, there was already a sea of people in front of the central building. There were definitely no less than 500 million beings from different races here. Among them, almost all of them were martial artists and psychic masters. The sheer number of them was enough to shock anyone. Looking at these people, Cherry Teja showed a helpless expression. Previously, during the youth competition at the Pill Refiner Grand Gathering, at the last moment of the shocking battle between the Immortal King and Fudu, I'm afraid that person was only slightly more powerful than now. Now, it's just an ordinary competition, but it actually attracted so many people. It seems like a duel between martial artists can really attract people. Taratus nodded gently. He had already guessed this situation. After all, in this universe, the true mainstream was still martial artists. Although alchemists were important and respected, the ones who stood at the peak were still the strong. All right, I already expected this situation. There's no need to dwell on it. After saying this, Taratus walked into the void. He looked at the huge number of beings in front of him and pondered for a moment. Then, he slowly said, You all already know the news from before. I won't say anything more. This time, if you want to challenge me, come forward." The moment he said this, over 100 geniuses and freaks walked out of the void. Taradas nodded lightly when he saw these people. Most of these people were geniuses. Of course, there were also some freaks among them. However, he couldn't tell what level of freaks they were. After all, if one wanted to determine a person's freak level, unless they fought or encountered a freak of the same level, there was no way to tell. Taradas looked at the hundreds of geniuses and freaks and said, "Futu is a member of the Alchemist Alliance. Therefore, this time, if anyone violates the rules, they will be going against the Alchemist Alliance. Do you understand?" Although Delatus spoke in a flat tone, many existences were slightly startled when they heard this. They could hear the threat in Delatus's words. Perhaps the Alchemist Alliance couldn't have conflicts with all the races at once. However, it wasn't a big deal to only target one race. Moreover, these people were not the strongest existences in their own clans. Their races wouldn't have any conflicts with the Alchemist Alliance for them. "We understand." The hundreds of geniuses and freaks nodded respectfully. After taking another look at these people, Delatus gently waved his arm and directly opened up a huge space arena in the void. Everyone knew that the battle would be carried out in this space. "All right, if I sense that someone is using strength that surpasses that of an advanced perfect phase warrior or a psychic master, then I will personally take action and kill them." After finishing his last sentence, Delatus disappeared into the air. The hundreds of geniuses below looked at each other with fear in their eyes. Naturally, they could hear the terrifying killing intent in the last sentence of the Alchemist Alliance's Grand Elder. These people understood that their excessive clamor in the past few days had probably caused the Alchemist Alliance to be dissatisfied. If it wasn't for the countless races behind them, the Alchemist Alliance would have already punished them. However, since they had already come to this point, these people naturally wouldn't back down. Compared to those geniuses and freaks who were too strong, they were already lucky enough to be able to fight. Looking at the hundreds of geniuses and freaks in the sky, Wang Wei said to Lu Feng, "Futu, these hundreds of freaks and geniuses aren't simple. I'm afraid that all of them have a strength of perfect stage and spirit master Wang. There are also quite a few who are comparable to advanced perfect stage and spirit master Wang." Lu Feng nodded his head gently. If it wasn't for the fact that Futu was an alchemist, and that alchemists were synonymous with the weakest among their peers, he was afraid that these freaks who were only comparable to beginner perfect stage and spirit master Wang wouldn't have come up. However, when they came up, it didn't matter to Lu Fenglai at all. If he had been Emperor Lu Feng, he might have needed to deal with these beginner perfect stage martialists one by one. However, if he was a spirit master Futu, then these people wouldn't need to bother. With a mocking smile on his face, Lu Feng bowed respectfully to the 8 alchemy grandmasters and finally walked to the center of the arena in the sky. He looked at the freaks and geniuses who were quietly waiting outside the arena. Lu Feng finally stretched out his arms slowly. At this moment, he was the center of attention. This was because everyone wanted to see what kind of opponent Lu Feng would choose to fight against with a few geniuses and monstrous geniuses. I reckon that Futu will definitely choose the weakest. After all, he is an alchemist. Although the immortal king has called him an opponent, and he is a freak of the era, as an alchemist, his combat strength is still limited. As a great telekinesis grandmaster, I reckon that his combat strength is at most comparable to a mid-perfect stage martialist or a spirit master Wang. A freak of the era could raise his own body by 7 levels. Lu Feng was currently displaying the strength of a great telekinesis grandmaster, so 7 levels would make him a high-level spirit master Wang. However, due to the shackles of being an alchemist, in the eyes of many people, Lu Feng's combat strength should be around that of a mid-level spirit master Wang. Besides, before becoming a god, the combat strength of a telekinesis grandmaster could not compare to a martialist of the same level. Therefore, Lu Feng would probably only be able to defeat a mid-level spirit master Wang and draw with a mid-level perfect stage martialist. I don't think that's possible. In the previous alchemy competition of the younger generation, I watched him and the Immortal King compete. At the last moment, he went crazy to a boundless extent and directly activated the forbidden power. Although his combat strength might not be good, his pride still belongs to the freak of the era. Therefore, I think that regardless of whether he wins or not, he will choose the strongest opponents. Everyone was following the movement of Lu Feng's arm. Finally, Lu Feng's arm stopped moving. After seeing the person he had chosen, the crowd began to discuss again. I told you. I told you. This Futu might be incomparably terrifying on the path of alchemy, but in terms of combat, he really can't do it. His choice has already explained everything. Previously, they had thought that Lu Feng would choose some weak opponents. After seeing Lu Feng's choice, they all shouted excitedly. They had already seen the opponent that Lu Feng had chosen. That was a spirit master who was only at the initial stage of the upheaval transformation stage. Even if he was a 6th-level spirit master, he was only an advanced spirit master. One had to know that the strongest among them should be an advanced perfect stage martialist. He's from the Inferno tribe. His name seems to be Ranmu. He's a supreme emperor at the level of a freak. Supreme Emperor was another name for the Emperor of Massacre. He was a freak at the peak of the 5th-level Emperor realm. In that case, he's at most comparable to a mid-level Spirit Master. Such an opponent is the limit that Futu can fight against. I have to say that his choice is really accurate. Their voices were filled with mockery. Many of the spectators also began to discuss this matter. However, there were still many people who were silent. Unlike those who were mocking and discussing, these people had all seen the battle between Lu Feng and the Immortal King in the field of alchemy. At the last moment, Lu Feng's madness had shocked them and made them tremble. They didn't believe that a freak who had dared to touch the taboo in order to win would be a person who bullied the weak and feared the strong. They really couldn't believe it. At that moment, the hundreds of geniuses and freaks all smiled disdainfully after Lu Feng made his choice. Perhaps a mid-level spirit master wasn't the weakest. However, in these people's minds, Lu Feng had chosen him because he couldn't find the weakest opponent. If there were weaker opponents, Lu Feng would definitely continue to choose them without any limit. The Epic Era's Freak is just SOSO that you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.